You're listening to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a special guest to choose their favourite things about a particular Doctor Who story, and I have to guess what those things are.
All right, good morning, Toby. If morning it is. Right, here we go. My name is David Quantick. I'm a comedy writer, mostly. I write other things, and I do broadcasting. I'm also a big Doctor Who fan. I wrote The Dark Husband for Big Finish many years ago, and I also, by a strange coincidence, wrote a bit of The Thick of It, in which future Doctor Who, Peter Capaldi, is very rude about the children's movie Star Wars. My dad told me that I saw the first episode of Doctor Who from my pram, and I continue to be a fan. The story I am nominating is Genesis of the Daleks by Terry Nation. I love Genesis of the Daleks. It's the first really big Doctor Who story. It's the first one that kind of sets out a sort of uniqueness stall. Other Doctor Who stories have dealt with, his history and a kind of how do we get rid of Patrick Troughton? Oh, I know, Time Lords, they suddenly exist. But there'd never been what we now call a Who-niverse before. There'd never been a kind of context for Doctor Who. He just fought baddies, travelled around in a police box, met attractive young men and women, and that was it really. So there was a sense of anticipation about this story. And Doctor Who was huge at this point. This particular edition got round about 10 million viewers per episode, which was a lot. But this was different, this was serious, this was Genesis of the Daleks. It's what we now call event television. And as we'll see, it was an event for me.
Well, welcome everybody to this Doctor Who commentary on a classic story. This is very exciting for me because regular listeners will know the wheeze of this is that I get a friend of mine to choose their favourite things from a Doctor Who story of their choice. However, I've never met today's subject, from whom you've just heard, David Quantick, though, who is a big deal in my world. He's a fantastic comedy writer. I'm a great admirer of his work. I once thought I'd done okay because I got to audition for a small part of something he'd written, which I didn't get. But for me, it just felt like victory to even be through the doors and reading something with his name on it. Always been a great fan of his satirical writing and his brilliant turn of phrase. So he went on Twitter and said, anyone know any podcasts I can go on to plug my latest thing, which you're going to hear all about, I'm sure, on this. Well, I know, because I will put his voice where it needs to go. And somebody atted me, and I said, well, my podcast isn't really right. It's just me wanging on about Doctor Who. And he said, well, I like wanging on about Doctor Who. So I said, well, look, if you want to choose a story, and then you can add your plug. So it meant I got a really special guest, and he got to plug his wares to you guys, which I'm sure will be of interest. So this is actually recorded not long before I release it. Most of the ones you hear as they come out are at least 6 months 6 months old, really, because I prepare them that far in advance for patrons who are ahead of you guys, unless you're patrons listening now, but you know the score. But so this one I'm recording pretty close to release to tie in with when David's latest project is out there. So it's odd, isn't it, then, therefore, that Genesis of the Daleks, one of the show's acknowledged all-time classics, has been chosen. I mean, it was literally, I think, one of 6 unclaimed Tom Bakers. That was my slight worry when I said to David, you get to choose a story. Oh, here's the very dwindling list. But then I looked, and Green Death and Genesis were both there. So I thought, well, They're two classics that I'm really surprised haven't been. Somebody has chosen Underworld, for goodness sake. And in that week, actually, somebody claimed Green Death and David claimed Genesis. So I'm very intrigued to see who will choose what is left. Loads of new series stuff left. It seems this is very much an exercise in nostalgia. So anyway, that's quite a long preamble, but I thought there was various things of note to mention there that were unusual for this particular podcast, which I'm flattered and grateful to you all for listening to. I hope you have your DVD ready. I have the little light illuminated next to play all, which is what I'm going to do, because I'm going to start this story at the beginning, as is tradition, with episode 1 of Genesis of the Daleks. Let's press play or select or whatever you would like to do in 3, 2, 1. Oh my goodness. This is... I'm quite a traditional creature. I like to think of myself as an iconoclast who bucks against the trend, and I don't like things that are popular just because everybody else likes them. And then when I see people going, I don't like Caves of Androzani or Genesis of the Daleks, think, what are they trying to prove? Idiots. Whereas, of course, what I'm trying to do there is patrols people's personal taste. People might just not like something and not be doing it because it makes them feel cool. However, I can't feel cool enough to say I don't like Genesis of the Daleks, which is an acknowledged classic of the show, because I think it's terrific. I remember when I first saw this scene. Well, I don't know if I remember when I first saw it, because I can't remember if it's on the compilation that was shown for Doctor Who and the Monsters. I was most used to this on a cassette tape that I listened to over and over again. But I love this slow motion. I don't know why. I think it's because it's just slightly unusual for Doctor Who. The chalk dust of the quarry, the smoke, the we know gas masks are scary. It's because they're familiar, but we sort of, I think we're aware of how they feel and they look quite, but they're also reminiscent of a terrible time in recent history. But of course, the opening of Genesis to me was I stepped from the TARDIS into whatever it is Tom Baker says at the beginning of the cassette, he meets the Time Lord, played by John Franklin Robbins, who I have met. Long deceased now, John Franklin Robbins, but he played Julius Caesar at the Ludlow Festival. So I hung around outside the stage door and met him and left a little questionnaire for him, and he answered my questions, fairly briskly. He just left a. I think I left a stamped addressed envelope, or I left them at the box office and came to pick them up. He said the idea of playing universals has always appealed to me, which is why I accepted a relatively small part. It is a small part, but it's a good part. Daleks. And I mean, I knew this exchange word for word. And so, yeah, John Franklin Robbins literally does, half a day on Doctor Who. But I think this is a great character and it's a good performance. And he's a Time Lord, but I don't sort of count him like the other Time Lords, because he's the Time Lord at the beginning of Genesis of the Daleks. I mean, it's a we don't know who this guy is, but it's a bit like Death playing chess in the Seventh Seal, isn't it? There's a bit of that going on, but this I like the way that they've made this battlefield environment so spooky. It's Doctor Who in a quarry. It's not got anything unusual, machine guns and barbed wire and all of that sort of thing. But throw it together with this period of Doctor Who's history and the tone with which these stories are told, and I think it's something quite special. It's quite, to coin a phrase now, and which is going to be a little bit old-fashioned, it's quite sort of boys' own adventure. And my house was surrounded by Commando magazine and the World Wars were used as sort of entertainment quite heavily when I was younger, and I had elder brothers who had all of that stuff. And Doctor Who seemed a little sort of safer and more fantastical than that, because we knew about the real. We knew that the World Wars were real and horrible, although they were turned into sort of quite chipper adventures a lot of the time for kids. But to have that sort of stuff in Doctor Who did seem to confer a little bit of sort of harshness to Doctor Who that made it not for kids, and I was desperate for Doctor Who not to be for kids. Something's annoyed. It's brilliantly directed, this, but I think all of this is great. David Maloney does some fantastic location work, but and it's grim, and it uses, as I say, the gas mask. Just that little crash zoom there into the gas mask. There is something about a gas mask, which is why Stephen Moffat was a genius to hit upon it for, and he took the genius an extra level by having a child's voice coming out of it, asking a simple question. But the horror of the gas mask, there is something, stifling about it, and it's on a person, but it sort of dehumanizes their face. And he's got a gun from Galaxy 4. I like all of this very economic storytelling. We found a dead body. It's got ancient and modern weapons. Playing rock music is a terrible joke, but it's played quite right, and it's sort of meant to be a terrible joke. It's all this stuff, war of attrition, only backwards. I mean, I listened to the cassette of this over and over again. So actually, Genesis was a story for people of my generation that was almost too familiar. So if there was a repeat of Doctor Who, so it was repeated for Doctor Who and the Monsters, which was Curse of Peladon, wasn't it? This, and I think Earthshock, which was an unexpected series of repeats that my mum just went, there's a thing called Doctor Who and the Monsters on tonight. It was the Curse of Peladon, and it was 2 episodes edited together, so it was 50-minute installments, and it was a cut-down version of Genesis. I know there've been cut-down versions before, but this is the version. This is the one I remembered, and I was slightly disappointed because I knew there was a cassette of it kicking about. I don't know if I had the cassette at that point, but then I did get the cassette. I think I borrowed the cassette off my friend Ollie, and he just sort of let me keep it because I was the Doctor Who fan and he wasn't so much, and he always got things if he sort of wanted them, and I think there was a tacit understanding that I didn't, so therefore people are kind, aren't they? So I think Ollie let me have his Genesis of the Daleks cassette, and but then this was then repeated when they started the Pertwee repeats. They did Spearhead from Space and Doctor and the Silurians, and I'd got a VHS then, and I lived in my own house, and so I was like, oh great, I can tape off air good quality recordings of of Doctor Who stories, and of course then they jumped to Genesis, which already got a good quality copy of, because had it been repeated at another time, it seemed ubiquitous. And I remember, and so Genesis was always a bit sort of over familiar, which shows how sort of spoilt you can be. The reason, because it was repeated more times than any other classic Doctor Who story. But part of you, if you was sort of going, yeah, but I know the general public might benefit from seeing Genesis, but I can't show the Invasion of Time. I've got a really terrible quality copy of that. But all of this stuff, interestingly, I remember when I first got it on video. Bootleggy piratey, probably from a Super Channel copy or something. All of this stuff isn't on the cassette, which is yet another edited version. It's surely the Doctor Who story that exists in the most different versions of the same thing. Sharda is a slightly different thing. Different edits and lengths and all of that. And so all of this stuff with the landmine, which is, very much sort of padding, if you like, actually makes this episode as it stands on its own this very tense, establishing the battlefield sort of episode, and isn't really padding. I think it's legitimate, and I think that's only partially because it's done really well. There are other directors, or if it had been done in studio, the Doctor just having to tread on a landmine would have been, just them having to do that would have just been a bit tiresome. But actually that scene is done very well. It's played very well. I like the thing about, him saying Harry's no point is both dying and now Doctor, all of that. I like the relationship that the Doctor and Harry have when they do that sort of slightly indirect conversations with each other. I love this TARDIS crew, actually. And then I remember being quite shocked because this is suddenly the first time we're on videotape, and you suddenly go, oh, God, now it suddenly looks like every other Doctor Who. Or because it's videotape of outside, although it's a trench, it's still outside, isn't it? Trying, inside being outside, it suddenly go, oh, well, this is Doctor Who as, on sets doing their best, but you're not kidding anybody. Having had whatever it is we've had, 10 minutes, 10 minutes of film. So, that's another reason that landmine stuff is really good, because it's really sucked us into the world. And that's slightly jarring, that change, even though they fill it with smoke and they've done their best with it. And Duncan Brown's an excellent lighting designer. But it is, to a modern audience, that is, it jars. And especially if you're like, and you can see where the smoke gun is there. The smoke comes in from the corner. But having listened to this, of course, on the cassette, have I contextualized this enough, actually, that there was a cassette, an edited version of this story available on cassette before the days of home video, when we could just watch Doctor Who whenever we wanted. So it was like Gold Duster, but it was the only Doctor Who story you could sort of experience in that way. So if you had it, it was all you had, and so you went over and over and over again. But of course, on audio, the change from the location to the studio happens without you even realising it. So my brain had never taken the leap that these scenes in the trenches were any different to the scenes that were outside. Although, of course, we get that stark change in quality from film to VT. Here's Richard Reeves as the Khalid leader. People had sort of lost track of him. I think there was a rumour that he died, but I know a couple of people wrote to him very recently and got signed pictures back. So he's still about. He features quite heavily in the cassette. Most of his scenes are in the cassette, whereas actually in the story itself, there's quite a few characters that are very familiar if you're a fan of the cassette, who actually in the story itself do as little as some other characters who you don't see it, you don't feature at all in the cassette. So that's interesting. I'm going to go on about the cassette a lot, aren't I? I'm sorry about that. Guy Siner, General Raven. The other thing about this story is there's a BBC comedy called Allo Allo, set during the Second World War, the occupation of is it France or Belgium? France, and it's a Croft and Perry. It's not Croft and Perry though. It's Jeremy Lloyd. It's a comedy made by, in the style of the Dad's Armies, the Heidi Highs, the Yang Milords, those fine traditions of British comedy, doing that really odd thing of making a comedy out of a terrifying and awful period of very recent history, and somehow getting away with it, and also spoofing one of the best programmes BBC dramas ever made, Secret Army, to the extent that Secret Army is now only seen as the thing that inspired Allo Allo, which is to everybody's disadvantage and shame, because Secret Army is really one of the best BBC dramas ever made. And if you haven't seen it, I urge you so to do. I believe it's on BritBox now. I have it on DVD. But anyway, Guy Siner here is in Allo Allo as Lieutenant Gruber, who is the gay German officer, and it's a very sweet performance that he gives. But Hilary Minster, who's also turns up in this, is also in Allo Allo. So it's interesting that Doctor Who and sitcom cast its Nazis from the same cloth. And this is clever, of course, because and I like the point the Doctor makes later about very young generals, which is a very clever way of showing how desperately awful and consuming of life this war has been. If Guy Siner there is playing general, and of course he gets the line about exterminating the Thals, which he delivers with ferocity. But he's a boy. He's the Nazi youth. It's clever. So lots of little clever touches there. I love the way he says, "You'll never get out of here alive." I worked with Guy recently on a corporate video. In fact, it was the reason I did it. Lovely chap called David Mansell said, "Will you come and do a corporate video?" And I was like, "It's a long way to come. I like David." And I go, "Oh," he said, "but and I wouldn't normally do it. I try not to travel for much, and but it was a safety video thing." He said, "And Guy Siner's doing it," and David, because David's such a good an experienced TV director, all the casts he gets are always good. So you go, oh well, if it's I'll do it if it's a day with a really interesting cast of good people. And and there were some people from more recent telly as well. But Guy was the lure for me. I got to work with General Raven. Nice fellow. And yes, and I like that set of with the battlefield, which I'd forgotten from watching it and hadn't sort of pictured quite when I listened to the cassette. I think you can get yourself a tin and put £1 in every time I say cassette. We'll raise a fortune for charity. I like Sarah's Yellow Coat. But yes, it's very good. The way that the Khalid civilization is depicted is excellent. And it's amazing, isn't it, how this was commissioned by the team of Letts and Dix, but it is very much a Hinchcliffe Holmes production. It's amazing how, short, how many stories is this? It's what's 3 after Robot, 4 after Planet of Spiders. It's a different show. It's tougher. It's grittier. Look at that lighting from Duncan Brown. It's excellent. The attention to detail of making it, I think what Philip Hinchcliffe would call muscular. It's muscular storytelling. It's a muscular depiction, within the confines of it being a kids' tea time drama. But the lines are a little crueler. The performances are a little more uncompromising, or a little less compromising. And our heroes are wielding guns and shoving them in the smalls of people's backs. And here is the amazing Peter Miles, who I have to say, I've encountered Peter a few times, and he was an eccentric fellow. He was quite a strange man, and he was nothing like as cold as he is as Nida here. He was a bit more of a turn. He had a bit of patter about him, and yet I think he is absolutely pitch perfect as Nida here. I think it's an absolutely superb performance, a brilliant piece of casting, and I love the fact, in lesser Doctor Who, that the villain would be undermined there because the Doctor would have tricked him there, but Nida is not tricked. And I also like the fact that he tells Raven to get down because he's conserving his fellow soldier, because he's a resource that needs conserving. And I love the line that he gets about, we'll find out what's different about them by autopsy, that he's just about to say. That is this society, this setup, this world in a nutshell. And the fact that they look like Nazis. And I like the fact that Nida, I think one of the great things about Nida is he doesn't enjoy it. There's no cruel smirk there. It's cold, it's clinical, it's efficient. And that's why it's even more frightening. And a word for Tom Baker. Come on. I've not even mentioned him. And machine guns make a difference. Graham Harper knows this in Caves of Androzani. I like a laser bolt, but for this story, the machine guns are really, really important. It's a shame that you get that sort of Venetian blind effect from machine guns in the studio. And isn't it amazing that viewers and television people just have to go, well, we get lines when there's guns, and if we want guns, we get the lines. But look at all these. I think all these shots in the on location with the cowled figures silhouetted, and just the colour, that chalky, dusty landscape. Where the stones are sharp, and there's rusty things, and you could imagine sort of shrapnel burying itself into somebody's thigh. You can imagine broken teeth and people getting knocked about. It's that kind of environment, which it's not the jungles of Spyrodon, which are slightly more. I know there's a bit on location there, but it's slightly more fantastical. There's nothing fantastical about this. People in balaclavas, people have those whatever those waterproof cloaks are called, which are very reminiscent to me of German soldiers in World War One, and all of that stuff's very haunting because it's people within living memory, or certainly was at the time, and living history, and genuine people in horrific situations, which are just so evocative. So a word and just shooting through barbed wire, and we love the mutos with their smoking feet. It's amazing how much you value dry ices in productions like this. I mean, look at all that mist, but then you've got the muto with his smoking foot as well. I mean, I don't know what that suggests. I don't know why his foot's smoking, but it's effective and it's pretty grim. And again, sometimes shambling aliens. That's a brilliant shot of Peter Miles's eye through the spyglass, and it accentuates his iron cross as well, which I think is a bit too on the nose, and they do remove it later on. I think, if you can be metaphors for Nazis without dressing exactly the same as Nazis. But yes, shambling aliens like the mutos can sometimes be a little bit embarrassing. Grunting. Actors unconvincingly sort of grunting away, but the muto's silent and just a sort of slightly contorted shape that's a sort of parody of the normal human silhouette is it's effectively different enough to be unsettling and grotesque. I think everything is so well judged here. And I like the sort of uneasiness between, and I feel this is great. I feel like because of the set feels like it has a roof. It feels like we're in a bunker, or we're underground, or we're protected. The sense of place is very good. I love this speech that he does. They were banished into the ways that live and scavenge like animals. He's so good. And look at race pure. We must keep the Khaled race pure. And look how he holds his gaze. He's totally unintimidated by the Doctor. And a very harsh policy, said the Doctor, speaking volumes. I mean, the exchange here, and your views are not important. And I just love little touches like that. The army has prisoners. The elite are a different thing. The little factions there. And it shows the pecking order. So you think, normally go, well, the general's going to be somebody that's in charge. Oh no, there's this other bunch. What's that about? And doesn't this episode has the line as well, isn't it? They'll be hanged instead of shot. War is hell. But it cleverly and economically, and I suspect it's. I mean, I may be being unfair on Terry Nation, but I sense the hand of Robert Holmes in those little economical bits of world building. They nobody ever went, should we be a bit more subtle about the Nazi thing? I don't mind it, but and of course it's less stark now because there's so many World War II films at this period. I wonder if it would have been perhaps a bit too over familiar here. Watching it, if you were to do a sort of Doctor Who marathon and all you were watching was Doctor Who, or you pluck this off the shelf having watched a load of modern stuff. I think it's perhaps more effective. But there were a lot of Nazis on TV and films at this period of time. And of course, Terry Nation's. This is what I will credit Terry Nation with, is splitting the TARDIS team up, which is a great way of telling the story. And here we have the beginning of Davros, which again now, because there's a lot to say about Davros. So I was born in between this and Destiny. So Davros was already established by the time I knew about Doctor Who, but I hadn't seen him. Destiny is one of my very, very first memories, and I remember Davros coming because I knew Davros was dead. So Davros was old and dead, even though actually, from where I was positioned, he was new because he was in the last Dalek story that had been transmitted. But to me, Genesis was, like all of the other Daleks, like Day or Master Plan or whatever. It was an old Dalek story. The fact that, when I was watching Doctor Who, it was only a couple of years old, made no difference. It's a great cliffhanger. I think it's a better cliffhanger at the time than it is now, because it's got so many things that are sort of so familiar, and we know with Davros the best is yet to come. But as a reveal, that's pretty good. It always annoys me that they get Davros, Nyder, and Garman all get sort of bunched together on the credits. I think they deserve bigger writing and more space to themselves, which they never quite get. Michael Wisher never gets a single credit caption, I don't think. And I'm sure Garman gets further down the credits as he gets more to do, which I think is a bit annoying for him. Anyway, only I care about this stuff. Elmer Cossey, film cameraman. Wow, well, he went on to have a terrific career, Elmer Cossey, actually, in movies. So, I mean, the photography is absolutely superb. So I'm going to pause that, and I'm using the wrong remote control. So I'm going to pause that, because I need to choose my favourite thing about that episode. Oh, God. I mean, it could be anything. There's nothing bad in it. It's brilliant, isn't it? Even if you're not a Genesis liker, that doesn't put a foot wrong. It's a terrific production. It's a flawless cast. I mean, the Khalid leader guy has very 70s hair, and there's that stark bit between location and VT, but that was those would have that they were just in the grammar of the time. I think it doesn't put a foot wrong, and it has so much to recommend it. The dialogue sings. I mean, it has an advantage, of course, that it's etched into my brain stem because of repeated listening over and over and over again. Anyway, look, what is my favourite thing about that? Oh, there's so much that's good about it. Shall I say... I will say the film work, because that encompasses that brilliant slow motion deaths at the beginning, which is such a simple thing to do that all immediately says, I mean business, and this is horrible. But at the scene with the Time Lord, which has got it's got the Seventh Seal thing going on about it, but it's also got some cracking lines, and a great performance from John Franklin Robbins. But all the silhouettes, the smoke, the chalky bricks, there's just the sound of going over all those rocks, bits of rusty metal lying around. And the fact that so much of it, the fact that it's a Doctor Who story that opens with about 10 minutes of film, I think is so it really sets its stall. It puts its money up front, as it were. And then, of course, we know the stuff that's later on. It involves, good dialogue and good acting, but what it's done is it's sucked us into that world. So I'm going to say the stuff on film, although honourable mention to, the dialogue and the world building and Peter Miles. I mean, I've got to be careful with Peter Miles because he is amazing. I'm sure David's going to choose him. So I've got to choose him before David does, because if the rules are, if I choose something in episode 1 that is then chosen for episode 4, I do get the points for that. However, if David chooses something now that I would have perhaps chosen in 2 or 3 episodes' time, that's tough. I have to choose something else, because once it is chosen by my guest, it is claimed and I cannot get points for that. So probably thinking that David will now choose Peter Miles as Nyder. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Right. Episode 1. Episode 1 of Genesis of the Daleks. Well, I mean, I was blown away. There was so much in it. This Nazi world, the war between... I've forgotten their fucking names. The ongoing Dalek war, which we'd seen in the movie, Doctor Who and the Daleks, which I think was the first movie I ever saw, and which we kept returning to, and which I will be returning to. But for me, the thing about the episode, which I'm going to remember, is not something which I can share with hardly anyone else. It's that I saw it at a friend's house, and that was kind of weird, because I was a fairly solitary kid, and Doctor Who, famously, sofas, all that, was something you'd watch with your family or on your own. I happened to be at someone else's house. Charles Gurry, his name is. I went to school with him. His nickname was Bince because Bince Gurry, do you see, it was kind of a weird pun. And he wasn't a close friend of mine, but on this occasion, 8th of March 1975, I was at his family house. And maybe I went round for tea, I imagine so, because we watched it. And that's an aspect of Doctor Who that people tend to forget. It tends to be, I'm a fan, it belongs to me. There are no other people watching it in the world. How dare you say the nodules on the Cybermen's head are wrong? In fact, they are the 1974 nodules from Defence of the Cybermen and all that. So that for me is my thing about episode 1.
Well, I was never going to choose the fact that I watched it at Charles Gubbage's house because I didn't. But I love that, and I'm pleased that this podcast opens up the possibility for that sort of thing. Because let's face it, the competition is moot. I have singularly failed to ever win. It's just a jumping off point for us to discuss different things. And actually, I do have that in common with David, that I didn't watch this at somebody else's house, but of course my cassette was given to me by a friend, and that showed a friendship, an sort of unspoken thing of somebody who was slightly, because we didn't have an awful lot of money, so I didn't have many things. A friend just sort of going, "Oh, you hang on to that," because they did have things, and this particular thing would have meant more to me than to him. But he wasn't ostentatious with that. I was just allowed to hang on to it. And I'd forgotten about that until we started talking about this, my friend Ollie. And I spoke to him very recently because we're Facebook friends, and he's doing a project where he's trying to remember things from school. And we had a right old chat for a couple of hours, and we were great friends for when we were younger. And I think that's important, that you break bread with other people when you watch Doctor Who. And some of my very good friendships now are through people I met when I came out of the closet as a Doctor Who fan with my one-man show, my Set by Doctor Who scarf, having not really known any Doctor Who fans apart from my mate Mark and a couple of others, but they weren't involved in the world of fandom, in inverted commas. And suddenly I met all sorts of people who I could nip down to the pub with and discuss the cyber nodules from Defence of the Cybermen. I don't know where he got that from. And I have a common language with everybody, from somebody who works in television that I've never met, like David, to a policeman called Rick, who stopped me once when I was wearing a Doctor Who scarf and said nice things, and is now, I know, a listener to this podcast who, as I record this, pulled up when I was walking somewhere tonight and said, "Did I want a lift?" And I was nearly there. And I was already late, and we had a 5-minute conversation about Doctor Who, and we're going to go and meet for a coffee. And because it's what I enjoy talking about, and it's because I've met so many people from so many different backgrounds, and you immediately have that bond, the commonality, and that's a good point that David raises. Even though I wasn't going to have a chance in hell of that being a thing, as we go, he was either going to choose Peter Miles or the Nazism. Oh, he's chosen the fact he watched it at his friend's house. But I like what that has opened up as a conversation. And boy, I like Genesis of the Daleks. Okay, well, I think we're on a roll. So, we've got the opening instalment where the story hasn't really started. It was all mood and tension and a bit of character. So I would like to think that now we can begin. We've started very well. Well, I mean, all is good with the world, especially as now I've turned my microphone the correct way around, which it wasn't for episode 1. So apologies to listeners, especially if you're listening to the Omnibus and you suddenly detect a shift in quality, like you're watching an edited early Doctor Who BBC VHS. Well, it's all Genesises have their stumbling blocks, and mine was not checking a basic thing. However, I suspect there will be no such rookie errors from the team behind one of the greatest Doctor Who stories ever made, which has been chosen by a fantastic scriptwriter, David Quantick, who's got something he's going to be plugging, which is how he came into the orbit of this and very gamely offered to give us his thoughts and choose his favourite things from Genesis of the Daleks, even though he and I have never met, but I'm a great fan of his work, and I'm sure you will be too. Interestingly, on Twitter as I speak, David has also just done a thing where he's tweeted reviews of Genesis songs. So he's done Genesis of the Daleks and your actual band Genesis. So he's been quite genocidal. Let's see what he's in the movie now. What somebody who knew what they were doing now would have then invoked the title of a Genesis song to do the introduction or the way of starting the episode, but I can't think of the way. I was going to say, let's see what's coming in the air tonight, but that's Phil Collins, who is in Genesis. It's not an actual Genesis song, because my knowledge of music is terrible. So there we are. That's what you could have won had you had a different host. I'm just going to say, let's start episode 2 of Genesis of the Daleks. I'm watching on the DVD. So here we are, and I have a cup of tea. I have my favourite Doctor Who title sequence and music combo, with the possible exception of the very first. But I do think this is gorgeous. Every element of the design is rather wonderful, and it just transports me through time without anything literal. It's the time tunnel. So no reprise or reprise. We had that great episode ending, and we unusually carry straight on. Interesting. Garman becomes quite an important character, but there's a lot of waiting in the wings for actor Dennis Chinnery, who has tussled with the Daleks before. He's part of the ill-judged comedy sequence on the Mary Celeste in The Chase, and this is his first return to Doctor Who. He comes back to play Professor Sylvester in The Twin Dilemma, so he has an interesting experience of Doctor Who. There's the Mutos there. I like the way they do. I don't like the way they do. They do the thing that the vampires do in Curse of Fenric, where instead of actually touching the person you're attacking, you sort of wait for them to sink to the floor and then sort of close in over them. It's a sort of very phony TV thing to do there. It's actually better there than it is in Fenric. And here's Tane, played by Drew Wood, who again is a absolutely minor character, but because he's on the cast list on the cassette, and because at least some of what he does in this episode is in the truncated cassette version, he seems to be a sort of much more important character when I was introduced to this story than he actually is in the. He does this and we don't see him again. I love the way Tom Baker does What No Tea. Rob Shearman in our book Running Through Corridors described it as with quiet danger. And I think that's such a great description of what Tom Baker brings. Quiet danger. He horses around, but he has an absolutely searing authority. He is not to be messed with. And I would say that, Tom Baker is in equal measures. What he does so brilliantly is the dazzling teeth and the unpredictable smile and the sort of the quizzical joy in the world. But he also has an absolute undertone of threat and menace. And I think without that, he wouldn't be the Doctor that he is. I don't think. I mean, Hartnell was tetchy. Troughton could be sort of dark, but and Pertwee could be sort of stroppy, but I don't think any of them are quite as sort of fierce and I know Pertwee could do Aikido on you, but you get the impression Baker could thump you. which again is much more sort of visceral and immediate, especially if you're a kid. You know, it's much more, well, I'll use Philip Hinchcliffe's word, muscular. And that very much appeals to me, even though, you know, there's an argument that it's not right for Doctor Who, that Doctor Who exists much better as a fantasy. But as an aspirational child, and when I say aspirational, I mean I wanted my thing to be taken terribly seriously. I wanted to be grown up. You spend so much time as a kid wanting to be grown up, not realising that actually being a kid is even though it's fraught with fear and danger and uncertainty, you don't realise it, but you're safe. If you're lucky, certainly if you're in the Western world in the 21st century. I know not everybody there is either, but all right. But I was safe. I wasn't terribly happy, but I was safe. I was looked after. And the things that worry you and fear you and terrify you as a kid, of course, a lot of them when you grow up, you realise you need to be scared of at all. He's not going to last long. Jeremy Chandler here is Geralt, and I remember one of my brother's friends picking up my Walkman. I got a Walkman, and the only cassette I had was this, so I listened to it over and over again. And he picked it up and listened to it, and he was listening to it, and he quite enjoyed it. And he said, "Oh, they've said that Sarah is a norm," and he enjoyed listening to that. Like, she is a norm. All norms are our enemies. You know, that's very, very quotable, and it's a good bit. And again, you know, he seems like quite a prominent character, and he's in the Doctor Who for all of 2 minutes. Pat Gorman, however, looking great in his muffler or whatever that hat is, and in his woolly hat and military gear, giving a very good performance for somebody that very often, you know, didn't speak, but they knew they could trust Pat Gorman with lines. He is in more episodes of Doctor Who than almost anybody. Often uncredited, often in the background or behind a mask, but here he is. They've given him some decent lines, and the whole thing about, you know, kill it off, that's another entry into our quest to make this story sort of grim and uncompromising. You know, they don't look at Sarah and go, oh, here's a lady we could take advantage of, or who is imperiled, or who we can get to do skivvying. This is either labour material or something to be wasted. Oh, this is harsh. James Garbutt as Ronson, who is a key figure in Doctor Who's history because, spoiler alert, he's the first person to get exterminated by a Dalek, but also he becomes the Doctor's ally, and is a good character. And James Garbutt only died within about the last 12 months at the age of 94, I think. TV viewers would be more used to seeing him not speaking in RP but speaking in Geordie accent. But television wasn't ready for a Geordie Thal, so he has to do the RP business. It's interesting, isn't it, how regional accents would be seen as sort of breaking the fourth wall in a bit, because there's only one proper way to speak, and they've certainly got that cracked in space. But it's a good performance, and it's amazing, though, isn't it? Because I remember thinking he was an old man there because he's got white hair, and yet, he was still going up until relatively recently. God bless him. Never had the pleasure myself. He'd retired by the time I was in a position to find anybody. But he's interviewed on the DVD, but I think they only used one line of his, but he was there. But so why was I talking? I was talking about the fantastical, wasn't I? Yeah, I wanted Doctor Who to be grown up. I was desperate to be grown up when I was a kid. If only I'd realised I should have stayed or enjoyed or appreciated being a kid more. But I found childhood quite scary. I see kids in the park now, and I sort of weep at how... I do, literally. I sound like Tom Baker. I weep, but I do. I find it very emotional looking at... kids and how close you are to a really terrifying situation or vulnerability. I find that vulnerability because anyway, but yes, I did. And Doctor Who was my comfort. But I think when Doctor Who was strong and bold like this, it made me feel that I could cope with strong, bold things. So perhaps it made me feel more muscular than perhaps I was, because I think my emotions were always very close to the surface. I was always quite close to tears, for a variety of reasons. And yet I was never cowed at Doctor Who. I didn't watch from behind the sofa. I was thrilled by Doctor Who. It emboldened me. It empowered me. And because I knew things about it, it made me feel armed. I was armed with knowledge. I knew more about Doctor Who than anybody in the room. Nobody else in the room wanted to particularly know much about Doctor Who, but it made me feel strong and as though I could offer something, I guess, as well as it pushed all of my buttons. And these stories pushed my buttons particularly because they had a strength and a darkness that perhaps I felt I couldn't muster myself, but because I had a link with it, I felt maybe I some of that reflected onto me. I don't know, cod psychology, but it is an important part of our childhood. It's a very clever little trick there with the gun. It's a shame that the Dalek isn't more primitive. It's primitive but undeniably a Dalek, but it's pretty much the finished design. You wonder if they could have been bolder with that, but of course you need it to be a recognisable Dalek. Now you could set this story over, a period of months or whatever, and you could maybe even start off with one of Ray Cusick's earlier designs or something, and see the Daleks sort of go through their evolution. And I remember thinking when I listened to the cassette that this must have been one of the cliffhangers, because it has the feel of a cliffhanger. The music goes and it builds up, and there's enough of a gap that before Ronson says no, that could have been the cliffhanger. So I remember being quite surprised when it wasn't, and that Davros one was. Look at that mask. That is a work of greatness. Michael Wisher's performance, where he is a plausible human being and yet he goes a bit Dalek-y sometimes. It makes sense of the way that the Daleks speak. It's not silly robotic acting because it's coming from a logical, functional person, albeit somebody that has been through something and we don't know what. And I love the fact that they don't tell us what. I love the fact that we don't know. I love the fact that he hasn't got eyes, and it's not that he just can't be bothered to open them. Okay. Good job we weren't recording my house when he opened his eyes more recently. I love the fact that his eyes have been sort of blown out, and the lids have shriveled shut around the sockets of where he doesn't have eyes. But the half man, half Dalek idea. It's weird to think, and I think the new series has been very good in that they established the Daleks first without Davros, and then timed it quite brilliantly to bring Davros back, played so superbly by Julian Bleach. But because of course from here on, whereas of course when I was introduced to Doctor Who, Davros was in one story. He was in that one story. He was a one-off character, and he was dead. I didn't realise then that he was actually going to be in every single Dalek story from then on. And in a way, it did take away from the power of the Daleks, if you like. And I think it was wise to re-establish them in the new series without him. I think he's great, but I think the Daleks benefit from him being used sparingly. I mean, it's arguable that actually the Daleks, the subsequent Dalek stories might have been better without him, and to let him stand on his own. Well, he hasn't got 2 feet, but you know what I mean. And also, but then we would have been denied. I think Terry Malloy's performance in Revelation in particular is superb. And I think that's a great story, but I'm now just talking objectively about the Daleks themselves. There's another Galaxy 4 Thal gun, Thal/Dravin gun. I've actually held a replica of one of those. They're pretty hefty, and they're functional. They operate. The lights light up. They're wonderful things. She's so good. And here we are. So now this is interesting. Just look at the things like the little lights. The lights there. They're very reminiscent of World War II. And just the grating and everything. It's all quite realistic, apart from that shot of the rocket and that lettering, safe and toxic level. Okay, but the entrance was quite realistic. But this is one, because obviously this is a set that you see on video here in the studio, and they do their best, but the silver stuff looks like it's either been painted silver or it's silver foil, and it has a slightly sort of shiny and phony look about it. And then you see it on film, and just the quality of film, and the slight muddiness of it. Well, no, because it's clear. Film is clear. Film is not fuzzy. But what it did, the muted nature of the colours, it makes exactly the same set look magnificent and amazing, and it makes you sort of go, oh, I wish they could have made Doctor Who on film all of the time. But actually there's also a more of an immediacy about, say, a duologue or a performance like this that I think I think gets closer to you on videotape than it would on film. But maybe that's just because I'm used to it like that. But I know all film Doctor Who, you do feel slightly one step removed in a way that you don't from these sorts of interactions. But I like the fact that, they throw the Doctor in, and I think when Ronson comes in and he says, I'm sorry if they hurt you, the idea is that the Doctor's been roughed up a little bit. Again, it's not just he's been questioned. This is a place where questioning brings with it, violence and stuff that needs to be apologised for. And Tom Baker weathers it well. He doesn't shrug it off, but he doesn't make a meal of it. This is a guy. Yeah, he's like, it's all right. Yeah, I've been through the mill. I'm not going to cry about it. He's tough as old boots. But yeah, it's aware of its own mythology, isn't it? You stopped me from becoming the very first victim of a Dalek. And that is quite momentous to be back at the beginning. As David says, I hadn't really thought about it like that. It is it is event television in that we're into the first season of the fourth Doctor, and we're going, okay, we are going to investigate the past. We are going to put flesh on the bones of the history. It's not just, they're not just here to tell a self-contained story, which is kind of, and Doctor Who has to be very careful about that, because it has to be done in such a way that it doesn't alienate the casual viewer. And I think we all know that Doctor Who can sometimes, drive itself mad trying to tell backstories and rationalise things. But this isn't an exercise in continuity. This isn't trying to be clever and go, oh, I'm going to tie up all the threads. This is just this would be a really interesting place to set a story and a really interesting moral dilemma for the Doctor. It's not an exercise in sort of historical tricksiness and thread tying, and it has great fun playing with the idea of what actually the Daleks represent, which is a quest for, perfection, and isn't that ironic, because they're a green blob in a metal casing, but Davros's idea of what perfection is efficiency and single-mindedness, and but not beauty or poetry or soul. And it's and that's great. That's just a green light, a sound effect, and two really good actors going, yep, that's horrible. And Stephen Yardley as Severin. Why must we kill what is not in our image? Stephen Yardley is one of the great TV actors of the 70s.
one of those people that popped up in everything. You'd see him in an episode of Bergerac. He's even in an episode of Day of the Triffids, isn't he? One episode. Then he's in Secret Army. Of course, he's in Secret Army that I mentioned in episode 1. And then the same team make him the horrendous Ken Masters in Howard's Way, which seemed to me a reward for all his years of supporting playing. A part that got him loads of recognition, and he could really get his teeth into. He's also, of course, in Doctor Who in Vengeance on Varos, and then I think stopped. He must have stopped because he was certainly still working. Did he do Family Affairs? I think he did, but. I don't think we ever managed to get him on the DVDs. He's married to Jan Harvey from Howard's Way, but and I know Doctor Who magazine did an interview with him, quite a short one, but I think he's perhaps not inclined. And why should he? But it's a shame because he's got an illustrious TV history that I would love to interrogate him about, and I would be much gentler than the Doctor's interrogators were in this. But he's a great figure of 1970s. An 80s telly, Stephen Yardley, and he benefits everything that he is in. And it's because there's no sort of big names in this, but it's full of, certainly at the time, but it's full of, faces that you would recognise, but not necessarily anybody who sort of played a massive lead in anything. And interesting that for such an iconic character as Davros, they get a sort of jobbing. In fact, an actor that's just been in Doctor Who, because Revenge of the Cybermen has just been made, and quite near the bottom of the credits, playing coughing factotum. I think he added the coughing himself. Margaret, who basically gets to follow David Collins around being mousy in Revenge of the Cybermen, is Michael Wisher, who then comes back a week later as the lead guest character. So he had 3 months solid work on Doctor Who, part of the team, part of the furniture, being magnificent, and I think it's his finest hour, and I don't think he ever had a part to quite match it, and he is just extraordinary. They're going to do the breakout now, and again, funny enough, this is a bit that on the cassette doesn't sound. That's a good punch as well, and top marks to Richard Reeves for he punches the guy, but then remains in the action position. And then I even like the way he left. I like Richard Reeves as the Khalid leader, although I wish they'd given him a name. And he's not really the leader, is he? He's just a sort of soldier. But Ronson does not replace that grill properly. But look at this on film now. It just looks better. The scaffolding, the orange paint, the silver paint, the edges, it all just looks like, just an extra few quid. Is this? Are we about to see an Ice Warrior? Yes. Is this where we see the Ice Warrior's body, which has been co-opted to make? Yay! That's a bit of Ice Warrior. That. I remember finding that out on a Sevens model kit. I'm sure in the literature of that it said of an Ice Warrior. I think it said, and as well as being in these stories, the body of an Ice Warrior is also seen in Genesis of the Daleks. So I knew to then look out for it. Otherwise, I probably would have spotted it eventually on viewing number 75. But I was primed by Sevens. Where it's, you'd scour everything, even the backstory on a model that a friend of mine was making. I didn't have the model Ice Warrior; it was a friend's. But this is well done, and again, this is the sort of stuff I would go into watching this story. Go, well, this is just because I know they don't get out, so it's just a bit. It's not really part of the story, but actually, that's a shame that model is so it's shot on a different medium than everything else. But look, again, the lighting is great. The fact that these guys help her, the fact that Elizabeth Sladen is so good at being terrified without being sort of weak. It doesn't make you want to tell her to get a grip. It's genuine fear that you feel that you would probably fear, rather than sort of TV hysterics. And this sequence is great. It's really well shot. It's really well cut. And this is monstrous. I love the way, because this guy who's been quite horrid in episode 1, but he's now their ally, and he's young, and he helps her, and then he gets shot having helped her, and then he lands. I think that's extraordinary. Yeah, that's just again such a brilliant idea. You go, we're used to seeing people falling off things. We're not used to sit there, and you know how it's done. He falls, and then we do a different setup, and he drops just a short space. And of course, in real life, he might have splattered a bit more. But I think that's absolutely terrifically done, and it's just another little moment of beastliness that just gives this story that edge that it has. And then, is that the first freeze frame? Because I think I'd seen Deadly Assassin, and that freeze frame, which is so good at the end of episode 1 of that I hadn't taken into account, and of course I'd seen this edited together as well, hadn't taken into account that Sarah might get a freeze frame as she drops. And it's a little thing that David Maloney does that just makes your heart stop just a little bit. It's just, again, another little thing. Slow motion is not rocket science. It elevates those first scenes in episode 1. A freeze frame is actually, in certain circumstances, can look a bit pony and not be helpful. Not here. It really helps to sell that cliffhanger and makes it something different, and makes companion in peril in bit of story that's not important to the plot, just a little bit of action, to lengthen the story out a little bit, actually makes it very, very special. And that's what a great director does, is he goes, well, I've got a scene here that actually doesn't need to be here, so let's give it a reason for being here, because it's going to grip and excite everybody. And there's nothing functional about it at all. Sometimes action sequences or little bits of little moments, they're there just to sort of eke out the running time. And no, nobody's watching the clock there. Everybody's working to make it, really dramatic and full of jeopardy. So, episode 2, well, so much in that. But I think I have to go for, because it's the proper debut, the synthesis of mask, actor, conception, and the fact that it is more than a sum of its parts, and the fact that this is the first time, and that I don't think anything beats this first time, because of the familiarity, not to do with anything to do with the players or even the scripts or the plots or anything of the subsequent stories, but because as far as this is concerned, this is the only Doctor Who story with Davros in it, and he just towers over this story and works from the get-go. It has to be, and that mask is so good. Jod Friedlander, another of the unsung heroes of Doctor Who. It's got to be Davros. It's got to be Davros. What's David Quantick chosen? Probably not. Now that I know how his mind is working, he's probably going to choose the lollipop he was eating when he watched this.
Episode 2. I am choosing for my thing per episode in episode 2, Harry Sullivan. Harry Sullivan is one of the underrated assistants or companions or boyfriends or whatever they're supposed to be called. I really like Harry Sullivan. He was kind of slightly odd. He had his blazer on because he was in the Navy, and he said old thing a lot. And he was kind of warm and comfortable, but you got the feeling he could be an action hero. And he didn't last very long, which is a massive shame. He joins that short list of Doctor Who companions who only did one series. They're not called seasons. There are 4 seasons in a year. They are spring, summer, autumn, and the other one. Harry Sullivan was a great companion, a great assistant. The shows that he was in were definitely improved by his appearance. And he's a kind of reality touchstone in this show. He's the companion who's always surprised by things, who basically thinks that we should hit them. His morality is very straightforward, and it's something I'll be returning to in a moment. I love Sarah Jane Smith, one of the great characters, but Harry Sullivan is a fantastic second lead companion.
I like that, and I love Ian Marter, and he's very good in this. I think it's his I think it's his best performance because Harry is sort of quite chipper and quite sort of arch old-fashioned old thing, arch officer kind of stuff, and lovably so. And that sort of charming Tiffy does thing in Robot when he's the man from the Ministry and stuff. But he really pitches his performance absolutely at the right level in Genesis, and I think he's excellent. And I think that sort of very underplayed dramatic back and forth he has with the Doctor, where they banter but they never send it up. I think that's a good I'm glad, because I love Harry and I love Ian Marter. I feel, God, I've outlived Ian Marter. Gosh, I'm glad that Harry has his moment in the sun here in Happy Times and Places, and put so eloquently and in such a celebratory fashion there by David. I chose another icon of Doctor Who, Davros, but David has gone on the side of the angels, and that is perfectly understandable. So I so far have scored no points. So David's 2-0 to David. But there's a long way to go. And look, if he looks like he's going to defeat me, I'll just travel back in time and kill him before he can choose anything. Okay, well, I'm going to go to bed now. But that doesn't affect you or when you will hear the next episode, which will be out as scheduled. So I look forward to watching the rest of Genesis of the Daleks some other time. Thanks for joining me with it. Apologies if you wanted me to be picking some flaws in it, because I know that's always fun, but there's not much about Genesis that I struggle with, although I do see clams will be on the menu very shortly, so perhaps we will see some chinks in its armour. But at the moment, apart from the fact that I'm not choosing any of the things that David has chosen, I'm in a very, very happy time and place, and I hope you are too. Well, welcome everybody to part 3 of Genesis of the Daleks, getting the happy times and places treatment courtesy of my guest David Quantick, who I have never met, but whose name I have seen burned into the credits of many a great television show. So it's with suitable deference and much gratitude that I thank him for choosing. Interesting, isn't it? How this was a story that was not chosen, because as I record this, I've got loads waiting to go, but I've rush released Genesis, which is actually the latest one that anyone has recorded their thoughts to me for, and I've got 50 or so waiting at least. Some people have recorded their things a year ago. But David has a book out, I think, as this is released this week, November the 2nd, 2021, his big quiz book, which sounds like a lot of fun, and he wanted to plug it. So I was asking around for podcasts, and this isn't a pluggy podcast, but it is one where you say what you like about a Doctor Who story and then throw a plug in if you want to. So I've offered him that, and he's done it, which is very kind of him. So he's chosen so far the fact that he watched Genesis of the Daleks with his friend, and he's chosen Harry Sullivan, whereas I have chosen the film work in part 1 and Davros in part 2. It's an embarrassment of riches, this story. It's a genuine classic, albeit one, as I say, that hadn't been chosen. Emma Reeves nearly chose Genesis of the Daleks and then went for Time Lash instead. So it could have been a really, really early one. But she went for something slightly different. So I have paused between episodes 1 and 2. So maybe you're on episode selection, but I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Now it's on silent. That's why you can't hear anything. There we go. So that's it. Did start when it was supposed to. So here we are, Genesis of the Daleks 3. So Sarah Jane has paused in midair. She's done the David Maloney freeze frame, which I love as a little thing that he does in a few of his Doctor Who's. Deadly Assassin 1, Planet of Evil, with the Doctor falling into the black puddle. But this is a great sequence, and we go back a little bit. So I think Richard Reeves gets the credit, doesn't he, for being colored leader on this, even though all he actually does is to do what he did last week. So unfortunately he gets to die twice, but there's some great stunt work. The lighting here is fabulous. So I've already talked about this. So let's talk about the cassette. I think that cassette is so brilliantly put together, and bits like that you could hear on the cassette. It's amazing which bits of the story they kept and which they didn't, and which are so familiar to me. And there's a bit coming up which is dispensed with in one line, and the really horrific aspects of it are cut. Although I do remember them being in the Omnibus that I watched. Well, the Doctor Who and the Monsters Omnibus, but we'll talk about that. So I guess that's supposed to be a platform that's jutting out, but I don't. Yes, you can see now that I'm looking for it, but I've seen people writing online going, well, it's just a cheat because she falls inside. She doesn't. She actually falls outside. But I think that's not quite clear. I think that's a fair misunderstanding people make. But no, it's a little balcony. It's a little plank sticking out of the edge, for obviously rocket workers to sit and have their sandwiches on during a dystronic toxemia break. Dystronic toxemia. There's so many words in this that are so etched in my brain. But of course, I had to imagine all of this when listening to the cassette. I do go on about the cassette during this, isn't it? You and your cassette, Toby. Why don't you just get a room? Well, I mean, I did. I did get a room with the cassette. And in fact, I also, because my cassette was getting so sort of stretched and overplayed, is I copied it onto another tape. But because that tape was longer on each side than the commercial tape, I actually edited my own cliffhanger halfway through the second part, and actually edited the cliffhanger of this, which we will talk about later because it's different from the cliffhanger in the TV cliffhangers. But I edited my own cliffhangers. That's part of being a fan, isn't it? Creating your own versions, or just sort of wanting to be involved. I didn't need another copy, really. I was just sort of justifying to myself that I could mess about, and it's how you learn about how to make things. And I think we've all done that, whether it's people who can draw, who've made their own video covers, or my rudimentary editing was and I mean, I do that now with podcasts and with videos. I taught myself to use iMovie, doing in memoriam videos, and indeed the YouTube version of this, which is quite time consuming, which is why we're only on one camera, because I've decided to make life easier for myself. Now this is where so actually on the cassette, you just hear Hilary Minster here, General von Klinkerhoffen, and also Marat in Planet of the Daleks. So we have Thal continuity, but he was a nice Thal. And this is what's clever about this story, is that the Thals are nice in Doctor Who history, but at this point in the Dalek War, actually there are no goodies and baddies, and this sadistic guard helps the plot not a jot, but it just goes to show that actually in this war, both sides are doing pretty grim things, and let's not just mistake the fact that the Khalids look like Nazis, but the Thals are sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and they have the Aryan Terry Nation thing going on. So that makes the morality a little less black and white or black and blonde, shall we say? But in the cassette, you just had Hilary Minster going, "Come on back down here," and then it cut. And of course, that's all you need for the plot to, Sarah has been recaptured. But that little extra couple of minutes, and it's Guy playing, what is he, Thal Soldier, Thal Guard, but he gets a bit of sadistic character work, so it's nice for the actor. It helps to texture the world. It's pretty far away from what Doctor Who was doing a year before. You can't imagine somebody in the corridors of Peladon doing that. But just to remind you, it's Doctor Who. Here are the terrible giant clams. I mean, Tom Baker really tries to sell this. He's got disgust on his face. He does that sort of thing, but he's wielding a polystyrene rock and hitting a giant clam with it. Oh, and breaking off a polystyrene stalactite. I mean, this is, if you are doing let's edit Genesis of the Daleks to make it have a smoother running time, you definitely go, let's get rid of the giant clams. They used to so upset me because this was this, I knew this was a fairly infallible Doctor Who story, and then you go, oh no, and I bet that's the bit when my brother walks in. I mean, they really try and sell it, and the idea that you get bruises when you're bitten by a clam and all that sort of thing. It's an attempt to keep it real, but you can't pull. Well, can you pull? I don't think you can pull stalactites or stalagmites. Tights you pull up, stalagmites off a ceiling, and certainly that rock would have cut your hands open and taken some effort. Although Tom Baker did put the effort in, but you could tell it was polystyrene. And this is great. This is the Genesis of the Daleks, and this is Tom Georgeson, Dixie Dean in Boys from the Black Stuff, an excellent actor who's not been brilliantly served by Doctor Who. He's I think he's rather uneasy as Carville here. He's a Scouser, isn't he? Yeah, so you've got a Scouser. Is he a Scouser? I think Scouser doing. He's very Cockney and Between the Lines, which is an excellent murky police drama that he was co-starred with Neil Pearson and Siobhan Redmond in the 90s. It's had a little bit of a resurfacing on BBC4 in Line of Duty Fervour, and he's second lead in that as Harry the Chain Smoking, but he's very Cockney in that. But so you've got a Geordie actor and a Scouser here having to wrangle RP because you're not allowed regional Khaleds. But he's an excellent actor, Tom Georgeson, and certainly had a golden period in the 80s and 90s. He's in A Fish Called Wonder as well. And he returns to Doctor Who as the police inspector in Logopolis. I love all this. And I think a lot of this sort of, Khaled politicking is certainly lost in the cassette. But you get this. You get the politics, which I like, and I sort of believe it. You suddenly, with civilians, and the idea that in a believable society, the military can't just do things, and Khaleds aren't all the same. There are different factions, and the Doctor, in a six-parter, can try diplomacy. And Baker is so good at giving this sort of import, and he's deadly serious, and yet still beguiling and watchable and strange. But he's playing this absolutely straight. Although he's in a 20-foot long scarf, and he looks like a bizarre wizard. But I think the costuming of the civilians is an attempt to make them look, sort of like civil servants, but from this particular place the visual that they've created. And I mean, it doesn't really go anywhere. Well, it does, of course, because the civilian government interfere, and that makes Davros destroy his own people. Which, of course, is all stuff that wouldn't have happened had the Doctor not been there. But the Doctor has to be a plausible figure to be, to be seen by these people, and I think Tom Baker absolutely sells it. Max Faulkner behind the mask there as the guard, a great servant to Doctor Who, but a stuntman, so he's going to get punched or thrown over by somebody at some point. And it's a great look, isn't it, at this? Because we the Daleks we take for granted as, these merciless machine beasts, but this is an entirely plausible backstory for them, that actually they had to be created and then planned for, and some people would object to them or object to them as they are and want them to be tweaked slightly. I think it's all, it's all very clever how this story is built up, and so compellingly told through the character of Davros, with the brilliant sidekick of Peter Miles, and poor old Ronson's card is marked. That's a great shot. I think I've seen that's been used as a screen grab in Doctor Who magazine of Nyder and Davros together. But what I think because our sort of cliched image of Davros as the sort of, there he is tapping his finger, of the sort of yelling megalomaniac. Well, Michael Wisher does that so well when he needs to be Dalek-y. But it's amazing when you see this, when you're not used to seeing this in 6 parts, as I'm not as used to seeing it in 6 parts as probably other iterations, is the time it gives him to patiently tap his fingers and to size up his opposition. And he's not unhinged and out of control. Even when he's yelling, it's a sort of clipped control yelling. So he's not, one of his weaknesses is not the fact that he gets carried away. He's cunning. Ivor Roberts here as Mogren. I think he was I think he was an announcer for HTV Wales or something like that. He's as well as being an actor. But it's amazing how much of this is in the in the cassette, because it's not actually that long. They boil it down very effectively. Lovely Guy Signer. He's one of the few Doctor Who Star Trek universe crossovers, because he was Dominic. He spent some time in America. I think he's got American blood heritage, so he was. I think one of his parents might be American, so he's had a bit of a career in the States, and he's in Star Trek Enterprise as Dominic Keating's character's dad, I think. I'm not hugely knowledgeable on Star Trek, although I could name the regular cast of all of the series, but I'm not. It's not anything I'd ever claim to have special knowledge of. But I know Guy Signer's in it. Then our troubles really begin, says the Doctor, and grins away. I love that. It's false bravado to cover up from the real danger. That's what this Doctor does so well. And again, you sort of think of Nyder as sort of clipped and cold, but he always has a slightly sort of benign smile thing going on. They're both, I think, the way that we think of these characters, because they're so indelible, Davros and Nyder, actually undersells how brilliant and nuanced they are. I mean, I don't know a Doctor Who fan that doesn't like them, but I think they're one of those rare occasions where actually the reality of what they do is even better than what we think of them. Because I think you go in knowing that they're good. You go to watch Genesis and you go, well, I know that Peter Miles and Michael Wisher are good, but actually looking at them really closely, they're better than that. And the material they've got is good. They look good, and they bring so much more to it. Look how inscrutable Peter Miles is. And that mask, John Friedlander, that mask is so expressive and believable. I believe that is what Davros looks like. And this is great, because Miles isn't even, that Nyder's not sure that he's trying to control it. Well, and he will. I can. The death warrant of the whole of the college. Oh, he's going to kill his own people. And this is a great bit, because doesn't Nyder say you would go that far? And he says, "Do you doubt it?" Yeah. No. That is great. The fact that he gives it a moment, but he doesn't change his expression. He's holding. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of acting. That it's a wonderful exchange. So they because they're both on the same side, and Nyder is a loyal servant. This sort of stuff could be really boring. Just two villainous people being villainous, but actually there's so much nuance to both characters. And actually, what I like is, because you think Nyder has betrayed Davros a little bit later, it's not entirely out of the question that he might have done, because of that sort of darting intelligence and instinct that Nyder has, where you sort of know, well, he's a guy who's weighing up where's the safer. Deep down, you sort of go, no, he surely would never betray Davros, but you also know that his survival instinct is such that, well, might he? I don't think he ever would, but I like the fact that it's open to question. And I think we take Peter Miles for granted because he was in Doctor Who so often. He's brilliant. As I say, he was a strange man, I think. He was a bit of an eccentric. I remember him just kept saying in the Invasion of the Dinosaurs commentary to Terence Dix, Terence, don't you think that Grover is like Davros and Whittaker is like Nyder? Terence Dix just sort of rather crumply going, well, whatever. And it's very neat. Is that I haven't. I have, and Davros is actually very plausible here with the Thals too. And again, there's quite a good. I know there's polo necks which are quite sort of 70s, but I think with the sort of removal of time, I think they look. The costuming is fairly consistent. It doesn't look 70s to me in the way that I used to. Oh, my heart used to sink whenever anybody had flares on in a 70s Doctor Who story. I don't think it's because I am the youngest of four, so I had flares as a hand-me-down and was laughed at. My mother used to say, tell them they're not flares, tell them they're straight-legged, because they are actually. They're straight-legged, they're not flares. And it's like, yeah, I don't think you know how bullies work, Mum. Even if you're correct, they've decided that they're flares, and me rejoining with facts based on your understanding of the correct terminology for fashion I don't think is going to be the armour you think that it is. But this is great plot development that Davros would be so ruthless that he would destroy his own people. But I'm afraid I feel there are politicians today who, to get what they want, would sell all that is precious up the Swanee just for a little bit of power or that which can facilitate the machinations of their own friends, which saddens me because one would hope that people went into politics and public service only for good reasons. Another interest. I'm interested that I'm not watching this with my partner, who is a wheelchair user, who would probably be quite big on the whole idea that the disabled character. Because he is disabled. I know it's slightly more than that because there's a reason for him being half Dalek, half person, which therefore inevitably has sort of, well, he's a person using a wheelchair sort of connotations, even though it's not a wheelchair, it's a Dalek base. But because recently there's the new Bond film out that I haven't seen yet, where I think the villain has a disfigured face. And, I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about, well, why is it that disfigurement or disability is so often equated with evil? And that is a trope. That is I used to love this. When I remember being a kid thinking that was the most brilliant thing ever, and just so Doctor Who, he would just brazenly go up to them and go, "Could you help me? I'm a spy." The chutzpah of that, and the fact that he whacks their heads together. Because actually, if you knock people out, you could cause some permanent damage. But being knocked out in programs like Doctor Who is just sort of is an everyday thing, and once you recover consciousness, you just go about your daily business and often give chase. Whereas actually, a clonk on the head that's hard enough to knock you out. I mean, you definitely need to go and see a doctor. This is a little bit of he puts his gun down to go and talk to two people he doesn't actually know. That's a bit way too casual. And also, if you get punched in the stomach, they needed to hit him on the head because you don't get knocked unconscious by being punched in the stomach. But we know that these are the vagaries of violence in a children's tea time thing. And I'm only mocking it because it's there. I don't care. yeah, come on, go on, off you go, Mutos. So the Doctor. So yeah, this cliffhanger coming up is not the cliffhanger that I was used to, because the cliffhanger of the cassette. Yeah, why don't you snog the cassette, Toby? I don't know where the other Mutos go either. I hope they get out alive. But again, this is nicely, sort of grim attention to detail. Not just leave it there, have them come and shoot straight away. Boom, boom, boom. But this, so the cliffhanger on the cassette is from next week, when the Doctor, when the dome has been blown up, and the Doctor says, "And I sent Sarah and Harry in there." And then you hear the explosion again, because this cliffhanger wouldn't have worked on audio. But I remember when I watched the Doctor Who and the Monsters, and this bit was the cliffhanger, being like, no, that's not the proper cliffhanger. And of course, it's just a random sort of Jeopardy moment. It's not the most memorable cliffhanger in the world. Where I sent Sarah and Harry in there it really is. This is just like the 25 minutes are up. We need something. We need that man to recover from the blow to the stomach that knocked him unconscious. So there we are, Doctor Who, Tom Baker. So interesting. It's a sort of there is stuff you could lose in there, but and a lot of it is sort of machinations, isn't it? It's it's the developing sort of political situation and the little factions off against each other that I like, because it means, and especially as I think, because I was used to this in short form. You're going to say cassette again, Toby? Shut up. I think when I first saw this, I actually liked the breathing space that the story was given, because realizing that actually some of those scenes that weren't needed in that shorter version do actually really help to give the story some texture, and all of the characters are sort of believable. And that even though they've been imposed back into the story as I knew them, don't, I think, slow the story down particularly. Yeah, the cliffhanger's fairly disposable, and the clams are an embarrassment. But other than that, all of that is still high-end Doctor Who, and even the scenes that are quite talky and dialogue-heavy are done with conviction by good actors, all of whom I think have made those dialogue scenes really work. The councillor, the councillors have not agreed, then the councillors are fools. I buy all those, even though the wider world of politics is represented by one man in a polo neck jumper. I do believe that world. I do believe that the Doctor's trying to get the feelers out there. But what is my favourite bit of that episode? I'm going to nail my colours to the mast. And I need to come back to the disability thing as well, because I started talking about the James Bond film and the thing of disfigurement meaning bad, which is interesting. And I'm not condemning anything. I just think it's interesting to talk about. And I don't think there was malice in the hearts of Doctor Who makers in 1975. But I think it's interesting to look at now, and I certainly don't think it takes away from the brilliance of what Davros is. But he exists within a tradition that itself is worth us considering, especially now. And especially, I'll talk about disability later, because now listen. And I've only become aware of a lot of this stuff because I'm, happen to have shacked up with a disabled performer. So my sensibilities have been attuned to this. So I'm claiming no virtue on my part. It's only when we become aware of things that that's answered its own question. That answers itself in the setup. We only become aware of things when we're aware of them. My favourite thing. What's your favourite thing about Happy Times and Places episode 3 of Genesis of the Daleks, everyone? It's the bit where Toby shuts up. Okay. My favourite thing about episode 3, which I think says a lot about how I the bits of Doctor Who that really appealed to me and when I was a kid is the bit where Hilary Minster, General von Klinkerhoffen off of Hello Hello, Marat off of Planet of the Daleks, and now the Thal soldier who, for the sake of nothing else but to add a bit of the muscular to Genesis of the Daleks, kicks Sarah Jane, holds her, and dangles her down. It's horrible. It's not very Doctor Who-y. Doctor Who is often much more fantastical than that, but it's just a moment where that doesn't need to be there, but the art lies in the fact that it is there, and it's a particular sort of violent and sadistic art that somehow, in the containable world of Doctor Who, appeals to me, and I'm sorry about that. And so let's see what David Quantick, genius comedy writer, has chosen for his thing for episode 3.
For episode 3, I choose Davros. Oh, God. Davros is one of the great Doctor Who characters. He's an unusual Doctor Who character because he only exists in the context of another character, i.e. the Daleks. But he's kind of that thing of upping your game. As everyone knows about the sitcom Frasier, Frasier's brother is like Frasier, only more so. Niles is more niminy-piminy, more fastidious, more pedantic, more annoying than Frasier, and it works really well. And Davros is, in a sense, the Niles to the Daleks, Frasier. Take the Daleks, the most horrible creatures in the history of science fiction. They don't look like aliens, they don't look like robots. They're not, as has been said, bug-eyed monsters. How can we make it worse? Well, cut one in half and stick a wizened old man in with a load of weird gubbins all round his head and a voice which is actually nastier than a Dalek's voice. Davros is kind of worse because he looks a bit like us. He's partly human. And they gave him, I think, a great Hammer horror reveal in the start of the series. And it's interesting, Davros is your classic character who gets killed off at the end. Oops, didn't think that one through, did we, Terry Nation? And then keeps coming back year after year after year. He's met all of them. I don't think he met Jodie Whittaker. That was an omission. I love Davros.
Yeah, well, I actually get that point. This is one of the advantages of this game for me, is that if I have already chosen something and the person chooses it, I get the point. So I get a point for Davros, which means I'm glad I chose him early. But I had to, didn't I? I'm so enthused by Davros. And it's interesting because in that episode he was very quiet and calculating. I love that description of him as the Niles of Doctor Who. I also like the word nimbly-pimmily. But yeah, that it's very true, because if you think about sort of Day of the Daleks and Planet of the Daleks, which are a great but unremarkable stories, the Daleks are sort of going through. You get the Supreme Dalek with the great torch on its head in Planet, but I think but you know, there's the master plan. Oh, we're talking to all the aliens in the galaxy. You know, power. Oh, they're sneaky. David Whittaker writes them so well. Evil. We've got the Emperor Dalek. When they decide to do, there's a sense of occasion about the Daleks coming back. Which is sometimes why I object in the new series where they have cameos in stories, because then the Daleks having their own story, so it's just like, well, they're always popping into it in a flashback or a dream sequence or whatever, and you go, oh, but that's for another time. But Davros, yeah, he ups the stakes, but I also think and because the Daleks are brilliant, I mean, they're fantastic, but to then give them to have a slightly human-y Dalek, to then do all the things that the Daleks do, but, you know, have no mercy, speak in a shouty staccato way when necessary, but then to add to that a bit of cunning, a bit of guile, a bit of duplicity, a bit of vulnerability even, and you suddenly go, oh, that's actually made it's sort of like the Dalek and human factor combined from Evil, where that's so effective, but they've actually embodied it in one person. I think Davros is brilliant. I think Michael Wisher is so good. I think that mask is fantastic. Yes, David, I agree that Davros is brilliant, and I chose him an episode ago, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. Along with some smoked salmon and scrambled eggs. No, it's tossed salad and scrambled eggs, isn't it? I could never quite work out what it was that Frasier was singing. So that would have been a great way to end if he'd actually said smoked salmon, but it's tossed salad and scrambled eggs. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen Frasier. That could have been a really neat package tied up and an exit, and I've fouled it up. I got delusions of grandeur and ended up with egg on my face. How very like Frasier or Niles. You decide. Well, welcome everybody to episode 4 of Genesis of the Daleks. If you want to raise a lot of money for charity, you can perhaps run some sort of sweepstake or contributory box for how many times I say cassette, which I've been doing with annoying regularity. It's probably one of only a list of annoying things that I do. But anyway, this is what this is. You're listening. It's your fault. I am Toby. I'm going to try and accentuate the positive of every episode of Doctor Who that I watch with the help of a friend of mine, or in this case, not a friend, but a writer whose work I've long admired, who has come up with 7 things that he likes about Genesis of the Daleks, 1 per episode and 1 bonus. So let's see what it is he likes about episode 4, and I'll see if what I like is the same as what he likes. And here we go. I'm paused between episodes, so I'm going to press play. You can press select episode or whatever it is that you do in 3, 2, 1. And there we go. So David chose Davros last week. There's things I could have chosen without even thinking about it. Something neither does or neither himself will have to be. The fact that you could choose. Tom Baker is on such great form. David's already chosen Harry Sullivan. Elizabeth Sladen is fantastic in this as well. I love the way that there's a bit where he greets them in the cave and she goes "whoa" when they hug. I love that bit. She's full of lovely, nice little touches. There's so much of this. It's a grim story of genocide in which the Doctor doesn't actually win. Lots of good people die, and the environment is a pretty grim and unforgiving one. And yet, for me, it is comfort. Isn't it odd how we are, fairy tales that we read, we are comforted by containable violence. That must, because we're not, I'm not turned on by the violence in this, although I do get a rush from the drama, and actually then I suppose the nastier it is, the more of a kick I get. So maybe I do get turned on by the violence, but I'm not a violent person. I find real life violence extremely distasteful and distressing. So it must be that it is containable. That we have, I suppose we all have violent urges that kick in when we try to protect our own. I could be violent to protect my children or my loved ones. So I think we all have it within us. So it's interesting when we watch it. What is the how? And I find it extraordinary that I grew up on war films, and now I look back at that and go. And I mentioned the Commando magazines and things like that. The people being entertained by those movies were very often the people that lived through it. My granddad. I remember talking to him about the war, and in the way that a bloody child does. Oh, that's very clever because the takeoff was actually done by the camera moving there. That was a neat little trick. Bit of stock footage there, we'll forgive that. And I stupidly saying to my granddad, did you ever kill anybody? Oh, and he just, shrugged it off. Went, well, wouldn't talk about it. That's the cliffhanger. I left Harry and Sarah in there. And actually, I think the explosions were maybe slightly different on the cassette. But that's very well done. Well done, Tom Georgeson, looking up because they're underground in a sort of bunker situation. Poor old Ronson doesn't get much to do. I've got a feeling that actually was the cliffhanger supposed to be a bit later, and that's why Ronson should really have been killed in episode 3, because the cliffhanger was to come after Davros's speech after Ronson is exterminated. Or did I dream that? I don't know. This is not a factual podcast. This is me saying what I see, but I have a vague memory of that. When I get to, and I remember, I know that they wanted the deaths to be really gruesome in this, so people sort of fly about and die quite slowly in this, and I think that's because David Maloney wanted the deaths to be as agonising as possible, so they're quite drawn out, and the poor old actors, now I think you'd make it shocking by a sort of zap and they're dead, but did I dream that was supposed to be the cliffhanger? I think I did. But anyway, look it up. Sometimes I'm just a catalyst for further study. If an element of doubt creeps in, I will say so, I promise you. But what was I talking about? Yeah, the sort of World War II dramas or films. I mean, were legion. And yes, I said that embarrassing moment where I interrogated my granddad, who didn't really talk about. Probably, I've rubbed shoulders there. Had eaten breakfast with somebody who probably saw things that I would never, that would have caused me lasting damage. We talk about our feelings now, and that's quite right, and we encourage that, and we encourage us to talk about our vulnerabilities and the things that cause us anxiety. And I get anxious phoning people up. I get anxious getting on the bus. Well, how anxious would I have been at Dunkirk? That's it. I mean, it seems monstrous to me that my anxiety is indulged when that generation had to bottle theirs up. But that is, of course, progress. And just because they had to deal with things in the way that they did doesn't mean that we don't learn. But it just made me feel slightly guilty sometimes. But the idea that those very terrible situations where very terrible things had happened, where the man who worked in your local shoe shop had seen his mate's face burn off on a ship or whatever, terrible things. And people just continued. But then that's what they went to see at the cinema. And that's what was in drama. I mean, World War II dominated. And here it is now inveigling its way into the sort of generally more fantastical or safer or cozier world of Doctor Who. And it's wrong to say that Doctor Who is cozy, of course, because it's there to frighten. That's beautiful, that tracking shot on Davros and Garman, who wasn't in episode 3. That's interesting, because you think of the sort of triumvirate of characters of Davros, Snyder, and Garman. They're the kind of they're the three central players on Skaro. Although he is a Khaled. Anyway, don't go off track because the first you hear from Garman actually in the cassette is later than this. He hasn't been in it at this point. You just hear, a trap was being laid for Garman, says the Doctor, even though we don't actually know who he is at that point. But he fits in. And it does sound like somebody says Lisa. I always remember that, listening to it on the cassette. You just heard that. So here are the Thals. I think they all die in sort of agony as well. And David Maloney's only got 2 corridors in which to do it. But I remember he's got a thing about glasses, because a lot of the Thals have glasses as well. And Betan. I love Betan. Harriet Philpin, who has never done an interview about Doctor Who. I think she lives in Ireland. I think a couple of people have tracked her down, but she's in Blake's 7 episode as well, isn't she? But I like Betan. She's also the wife of the secret lemonade drinker in the R. Whites commercial. Viewers from listeners from abroad might not know that we have a famous advert for Our White's Lemonade, where a man in his pajamas sings a song about being I'm a secret lemonade drinker, and he goes to Our White's, and it's Our White's Lemonade, and his wife, who catches him drinking the lemonade in secret, is Harriet Philpin, and they redid it recently. I say recently, it was probably 15 years ago, with the same actors and used, and I think they put a thing in the paper saying they couldn't find the wife, and Harriet Philpin's son read it and got in touch with her, and she did the advert. And the other guy, the secret lemonade drink himself, is Julian Chagrin. And you may think, well, that's got nothing to do with Doctor Who, and certainly nothing to do with Genesis of the Daleks. It has, because Julian Chagrin is the son of Francis Chagrin, who did the incidental music for the Dalek invasion of Earth. So it all ties together, and all of that is true. To divert you from the fact that I wasn't sure, I just made something up about a different cliffhanger. So yes, Betan pops in. This is the first we've seen of her, isn't she? But she becomes a key character. I like the way that the characters sort of come in and out of the action with ease. We've only just met her, but now she's a really important part of the story, and she's not going to spend much time with the Doctor, but she's gonna go off and do her thing and activate her part of the plot so that she's very useful at the end. And actually, Severin doesn't actually do an awful lot, does he? That's a great shot, because we're scuppered by the studio, and I often think of the studio stuff here as being an apology for the brilliant film stuff. And we've got no Daleks on film, of course, but the lighting there, it's no attempt. Well, it maybe is an attempt, but there's no way it's going to rationalise with the actual outside that we saw. But that night sky and that angle on that Dalek and the way the light glistened on it, Duncan Brown's lighting again, and the lighting in these caves is very good as well. Although no amount of light can hide a polystyrene rock. But I've just been thinking about Severin. I loved him as a character when I watched this as a kid. That's a whoa! I love her Sarah's little whoa. I don't think that's going to be my favourite thing in the episode, but I do love it, and I've always remembered it. But yes, I remember loving Severin because he's benign and he's nice and he's sweet, but he doesn't do an awful lot. He's there to represent the Mutos. But I think it's nice, considering the Daleks, sort of the Khaled's Nazi policy of, rejecting imperfects, which ties in with, aspects of disability and stuff like that. But certainly more so with their superiority and racial purity, that grotesque idea. That actually Severin is, a gentle and kind creature, even though he's, shambling and gnarled and might well have smoky feet. I love, why would it have occurred to anybody setting something in the future that we wouldn't use clipboards anymore? But we don't really, do we? And I like the character of Carvel here, played by Tom Georgeson. I remember reading the book going, I really like this Carvel guy, and he's not on the cassette. But it turns out he is, and that's quite controversial. It's not controversial, it's just got a trivial cast fact that has always slightly bothered me that I will, I'm sure, bore you with when we get to it. He's got a sort of gentle quality, Garmin. He's good casting, Dennis Chinnery. Not as good casting as Peter Miles, though, who is just perfect. What always amuses me about Peter Miles is that, although obviously neither is wearing a wig, so it's not. But I love it on the Doctor of the Silurians DVD, where Peter Miles in the documentary, recorded in the present day, has more hair than Peter Miles in the clips from 30 years previously. Although that's very sad. And I talk as a bald man myself, do you know what I mean? I'm a balding man. I'm clinging on to my last bits of hair for dear life. But I think Stephen Yardley's his hair's on the last gasp of clinging to his head by the time he comes back to Doctor Who in Vengeance on Varos as Arak, having been had he been Ken Masters by that point? Don't know, don't care. Thank you. Yeah, I love Sarah. I do love Sarah. I wanted to marry Elizabeth Sladen or Sarah Jane Smith or both. And I think she's got such a lovely quality. She's got such the right instincts for how to pitch it. And she peppers her performance full of beautiful moments. We love this TARDIS crew. And I do feel a bit sorry for Harry in that his days were seemingly numbered as soon as he was cast, really. And I don't think he becomes redundant with the Doctor. I actually think they complement each other quite nicely, and sometimes antagonistically. And Peter Miles is totally convincing here. I like to think that prior to this, you'd have gone, well, there's no way that Nyder would turn on Davros. And now that he's doing this, you think, oh, actually, he might. Testament to his fine performance. So, yes, as I mentioned last episode, the idea of a disfigured person, Davros, being equated with bad. Well, they're all very good plot reasons why he would be so. But I am sympathetic to the idea that often, and particularly in this period of Doctor Who, which I love, Magnus Greel, there's a cliffhanger reveal that he's got a melted face. Sharaz Jek is he a villain? I mean, he's certainly a villain that we feel sorry for, but certainly his motivation is that he's been scolded by mud, and he wants to get back at the person that's done it, and that's why he has to hide away, and that's why he has to wear a mask. And I love Robert Holmes's writing, and I think he deals in the, for want of a better word, grotesque, in order to give dimensions to his characters and stuff. But it's interesting how we've sort of slightly moved sideways from that now, or should be. But again, it's odd, isn't it? Because the 1970s wasn't free of people who had suffered disfigurements. Again, people in World War II were perilously injured. But we know also that disabled people were hidden away and not represented, which is why I still find it I do find it bizarre. There was a children's BBC presenter who had she's called Carrie somebody, and she's got a disability with her arm that means it's shorter, and there were complaints, parents complaining that their children were being exposed to somebody who looks a bit different. I find the idea that people would complain about that, even if they thought it, but to actually complain about it and behave like the wounded party. But anyway, I love this scene. Is a glorious scene because it has two of the best lines ever, and they both come from Peter Miles. There's also on the cassette ka-ching pound when Garman gets knocked out. It's like there's a sort of squeal, but is it a squeak from his boot? I don't know, but there's certainly a sort of but he's going to say three people now: Carville, Frenton and Parrin. Never meet Frenton and Parrin. Poor old Carville is thank you. That's what I wanted to know. I love that line. Isn't it just a glorious thing? And Davros coming out of the darkness. This is so shadowy and conspiratorial. This is the Doctor Who equivalent of the X-Files of Line of Duty. And this is the squeak. What is it? Is that Garman's noise, or is that just his boot going on the floor? It's very helium-esque. Shall I kill him? Oh, there's three brilliant lines in this, because doesn't he also have a... What do you want done with this? Is that in this scene as well? Oh, Nyder is brilliant, but it's the way that he doesn't enjoy the "shall I kill him." It's more like he's a child playing with an insect, a sort of a lofty disinterest that's sort of almost more chilling because it's so sort of casual and not indulged. Oh, I love Peter Miles, and if he was played by a more famous actor, I think we'd be trumpeting this from the rooftops. But because he's just a sort of character actor who played similar sorts of parts for a lot of his career, and is probably best known for Doctor Who, although he had the seasons with the RSC. Certainly when he's a Stanley to the Richard III of Anthony Sher is no small fry, But I think because we most closely associate him with Doctor Who, Doctor. No, he says welcome back, and then on the cassette he also says Doctor, but I think they must have lifted Doctor from another scene because, of course, on audio we can't see that that's the Doctor. So it's welcome back, Doctor, and it says and it just sounds like they're fading out of the scene or whatever, but it's because the Doctor is from somewhere else. I'm so sorry if you're listening to this podcast and you've never heard the Genesis of the Daleks cassette, or it's also on vinyl. So it's. Davros is so good, and yes, I like the idea that he's like, oh yeah, I can buy a story, and also I like the idea that he's so proud of his Daleks, and the fact that he and the Doctor can make the same observations but from totally different perspectives. The Doctor's saying make them a force for good, and he's going, well, they are a force for good. We just have different visions of what is good, and it's good writing that actually both sides have utterly plausible motivation, and they're both great intellects. And I mean, I know that the Doctor is a lofty alien, but he has the qualities that make us human. What mistakes do they make? I like when he gets interrogatory, he becomes all Dalek-y, and Baker's vicious riposte, his stubbornness is suffused with venom. There's a venomous streak to the Doctor. Forget the quiet danger that Rob Shearman talks about, but the danger isn't always quiet. You are afflicted with a conscience. Now, some of that writing, Davros could just go for out and out villain, and I think that the texture that he's given is to the serial's credit. But I like these outside characters that, again, the six episodes affords us, but we like them. They're nicely played. Julian Chagrin, the lemonade husband of Harriet Philippine, has another Doctor Who connection as well, is that his brother Nicholas Chagrin, his late brother now sadly, is Quillam in Vengeance on Varos. So it all ties together in this stupid brain of mine. I remember this so well from the from the repeats when it was watched, because I really felt that they were in pain and they were being tortured, and they're just rigged up to silly helmet things, and there's a bit of a sound effect, but it's convincingly pulled off by everybody. But I remember being really shocked by this cliffhanger and going, really, is that the cliffhanger? Because I hadn't expected it to come at all, because it's a really odd cliffhanger, but I absolutely love it. And really, this has no bearing on the story that we're watching, that the Doctor gives away. Oh, she's so good at this stuff. The Doctor gives away future Doctor Who storylines, some of which you go, I don't remember that one. Is that from an annual? But I love the fact that Davros is very clipped and formal about it. But he gets more and more sort of imposing and scary and vicious. But it starts from a very look at that. and it sort of comes out of nowhere, and it's, as I say, it's not really relevant to this story in the long run and in the end of it, but it's such a dramatic moment. But I'm not sure what I make of it, because I know that this part of it sort of really goes nowhere. He tells them, and he sort of goes, "Oh well, I've affected the future a little bit," and it's almost like the cutaway to that moment is quite, it's almost like an imposed cliffhanger. And yet I really like it, and I'm struggling to articulate why. I won't tell you because I'm not sure I can. I noticed Carville got credited above Garman. Then again, we had a school teacher, an English teacher, whose nickname was Spode. David Spode, I notice, is the designer, but I never worked out what Spode actually meant in terms of the nickname. It's a very onomatopoeic name. There is Spode. So if Spode is a rude thing, I do apologise. I don't know what it means. He was really called Michael Thomas, but we called him Spode for some reason. And always when I see the name David Spode, I've never seen him interviewed, and I think this is his only one he's designed, which is odd because it's such a famous story, and it's pretty well designed. I mean, that Thal massacre, that's basically 2 corridors. Well done, everybody. David Maloney's done a great job with this, hasn't he? So, can my favourite thing be? Thank you. That's what I wanted to know. I think it might have to be. I want to mention Duncan Brown's lighting at some point, because that's superb, and I thought that was very good in that scene, and that Dalek on the against the sky, and the shadows of the Daleks around the corridors. Duncan Brown's lighting. I might save that for my bonus thing, but I think the lighting is, spoiler alert, the lighting is definitely going to get a look. But I cannot resist, can I? Well, can I have a pair of lines? Thank you, that's what I wanted to know. And shall I kill him? A clip of Niders. Which, and if he says Nider as well, I think I get a point for that. I don't think he will. Oh, it doesn't matter. So I will say neither, but particularly that scene with Garman, and particularly those 2 lines. So, David Quantick, what is your singular favourite thing about episode 4?
In episode 4, as the show progresses, I am very much enjoying it. And so just a quick throw in, the Mark III travel machine. I love that idea. I love the idea that they are concealing the nature of the Daleks. Even though you could just say Dalek, people go, yeah, I don't know what that is. The Mark III travel machine, an obvious reference to World War I armoured fighting vehicles being called tanks. Yes, it is.
Ah, interesting. I hadn't considered that. Of course, the war iconography that I talked about there, the Mark III travel machine, and it's wonderfully euphemistic. But again, of course, it's nice, of course, that when we first meet the creature, it is not even called the very name that we know it by. And I think, again, because this story is so familiar, and because we know what we now know about the Daleks, that idea of going, well, yeah, we're going to go to a time when the first time you see a Dalek, they're not even called Daleks. Again, I think it perhaps would have helped if they'd been able to, have a much more primitive model. They could have had a lot of fun with that, and actually spread the story over a few weeks or months where the different models come out. But there's no way that would really be possible under these circumstances. The stories weren't told particularly in that way at Doctor Who at that time. I think you'd struggle to do it now, but that is a nod to that. The idea that these are pre-Dalek Daleks, and that of course adds to the inexorable sort of doom-laden outcome of this, because the Daleks do prosper. This is where the Daleks had a chance to not exist, and that's we've never had that in Doctor Who before, which is why it's such a great idea for a story. And isn't Genesis a brilliant word as well? Such an evocative and portentous, and of course it's got biblical dimensions to it, which of course makes it seem so much more impressive. But we're at a point, the only point, where the Daleks' existence could be, there would be no such thing as Daleks. This is so good. I'm loving this. I'm supposed to be going to bed. Can I do another episode of Genesis of the Daleks? I don't know. I'm going to decide after I've said goodbye. But I appreciate David Quantick's input there. So I will say to you, David, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
I had an itch and I had to scratch it. And yes, I was right. The cliffhanger to part 3 was originally when Davros says the ultimate conqueror of the universe, the Dalek. So that was supposed to be the cliffhanger, but it was altered for timing reasons. Well, welcome everybody. It's time for episode 5 of Genesis of the Daleks. And I'm going to try not to say the C word, that is, of course, cassette, because I feel I have alienated anybody whose childhood was not spent with their very first. They were called personal in stereos in my day. That's because the music in the headphones went into your ears and didn't leak out, to the annoyance of everybody else in the train carriage / tram / bus / library / shop / everywhere. And my very first personal stereo, because in those days tapes were very expensive. Even the batteries actually were very, very expensive. I remember my first one. I mean, you play a couple of sides and it would eat the batteries up, because I got a cheap one, you see. And if you buy cheap, anyway, let's not get into that. But yeah, I'm not going to say the C word. I am instead going to say the Q word. Quantick, David, writer of so much brilliant satirical comedy that I feasted upon, particularly when I was a student and developing as a comic myself. I had no idea I was going to end up being a comedian, but his name was always a welcome one on the credits, and his voice a unique and witty one. And now he's doing my podcast, extolling the virtues of the G word, Genesis of the D word, the Daleks. So without any more words or indeed letters, let's press play or select or whatever it is you would like to do. I am paused betwixt episodes 4 and 5 on the DVD of Genesis of the Daleks, and I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. So here we are. I think I taped this off the telly a couple of times, because it was repeated. In 1991, something like that, and then it was repeated later. It was repeated when I was at university, and it was repeated when I was at home. Yeah. Anyway, you'll know. You can look that up. I'm not here for the stuff you can look up. It's interesting, actually. It's a thing about sort of facts about Doctor Who and stuff like this. And when you write an obituary or something, you can make very simple mistakes, because the stuff you think you'll check, the stuff that everybody knows, you just sort of put as a placeholder. And it's the stuff that you have to look up and commit to memory, the arcane stuff, or the stuff slightly off the beaten track. That's the stuff you sort of tend to lodge. That's how people make simple mistakes on, otherwise, quite detailed and well-informed things. And why often, when I write an obituary, I'll submit it, and then, I'll do a little look down and go, oh, no, I've got that year wrong or whatever, because when you're typing, you go, oh, yeah, the year will take care of itself in a bit when I'm checking, and then you get sort of blind to it. Anyway, but talking of mistakes, I mean, the Doctor does, yes, you go, oh, brilliant. Oh, 2000, hang on, I thought it was 2064. Well, we'll allow that. And then you go, what the... And you suddenly go, hang on, I don't know this one. Are these off-screen adventures? But, when I was first aware of this, you sort of go, oh, well, is that an adventure I don't know? Is that what happens in Power of the Daleks or whatever? Because you knew that was on Vulcan. But so I remember listening, thinking, I don't think these are any actual, televised adventures. I think interesting because I mentioned the file last week, and I'm looking at the tape there and going, oh, people would go, oh, you wouldn't have it on a tape now. But of course, they can get away with any of this because it's of the attritional war, and they're going back to old technology. Although, actually, unless they'd got tapes lying around, they wouldn't suddenly invent tapes if they'd had, microchips or hard disks or whatever the modern things are. My brain is undergoing a war of attrition, only backwards. And I love this idea that Davros, for all his amorality, feasts knowledge as all great scientists, even those who go off the rails, would do. And so I love this, that the fact that they're at pains because he looks like the sort of the parody of person and Dalek, this strange human Dalek centaur kind of thing. To actually sort of humanize him in terms of going, well, he's interested in conversation, he's interested in knowledge, he's cunning, all of those things, to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that no, he is not a Dalek. He is, but he is very plausibly the person that created the Daleks. Lovely, gentle Dennis Chinnery. I've heard it suggested that Dennis Chinnery is his name is the basis of Dr. Chinnery, the vet for whom everything goes wrong, is the inspiration. That's the word I was looking for. At sober at 8:45 in the evening, and the word inspiration was far from my grasp because my brain is atrophying. It will come to you, young people. It will come to you. Dennis Chinnery was the inspiration, the name behind Dr. Chinnery in The League of Gentlemen, played by Mark Gatiss. I do not know if that is true, but I throw it there into the mix that at least Mark Gatiss is a Doctor Who fan, so he probably would not be unaware of Dennis Chinnery, especially as this was a Doctor Who that was available to fans when other Doctor Whos weren't. Oh yes, and here's a nice scene for Tom Georgeson as Carvel, who, as I think I said last time, I was he's quite a big character in the book, and I'm thinking I don't really remember him from the TV version, and then I listened to this the Daleks Genesis of the Daleks cassette. I promised I wouldn't mention it, and suddenly he's in it. But he's not on the cast list. Bottom of the cast list is Dennis Chinnery, and the cast is in order of appearance. That's very nice, that cutaway just before he clunks him on the head. But Tom Georgeson does feature. There's a scene coming up with Carvel and Garman, which I'll talk about when we get to it, because it has ramifications and it leads to a fact I've only recently learnt. Michael Wisher is so good casting. I believe I've read that they offered it to Roy Skelton, who's a good actor, but I think you'd be hard pressed to do what Wisher has done here, and I always think of Wisher as this sort of efficient, clipped, whereas Skelton I see as more sort of has more aptitude for the sort of high-pitched, on the edge of terror, slightly psychotic, I think. And of course, anyway, this is one of the great scenes of Doctor Who. And I remember talking to a friend of mine when they were preparing the documentary for the 50th anniversary, and him saying that he showed that, and it had loads of clips from New Who. And he was trying to get some clips in from old Who, and he showed this to the producers, and they thought it was rubbish. And it did make me think, why did those producers get the job of making the documentary? You have to pitch for stuff now. Why did the BBC give the job to some people who couldn't read? I'm not saying that everybody who grew up with modern television would communicate to them in the way that it does to people of my generation who see past the style of production and that sort of thing. But this is excellent. Actually, bugger that. This is excellent, whoever you are. And if you can't see that, I query why why people are making that got the job making that program if they don't have a sympathy with a large chunk of the source material. And it strikes me as a really odd decision for sort of brand Doctor Who to go, do you hate half of the program that we're making? Have you not even seen? I find that extraordinary. Anyway, I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive, but it's an element of modern television that baffles me, that there is so many people with actually a passion for Doctor Who or any other subject who do not end up making sort of, you know, or discussing or commentating or making programs about that subject, and yet there are people with scant knowledge but who are media people who get to sort of approach freshly a subject they have no knowledge of. I find that, or as I say, even a dislike for. There's nothing wrong with disliking Doctor Who, but I don't think you should be the Doctor Who people should give you the reins of a documentary about the program just because you happen to be, you know, you happen to drink in the right corner of the ivy. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked by a frustration I have with the way things are these days, and talking through one of the greatest scenes in the whole of Doctor Who just goes to show how annoying things can be if you're not careful. And the whole point of this podcast is to let all stuff, because it doesn't matter. In the long run, it doesn't matter, because this still stands, and it's interesting, you know, that thing about what other people think is not important, and there are enough people that will celebrate this throughout time, because it is one of the great moments of Doctor Who, and I think will always be watched, and it's just a great summary of what the Doctor stands for and what Davros stands for, and it's a brilliant face-off between two brilliant actors, and it's brilliantly written because both of them are given very plausible arguments, and of course it's a thematic face-off between, you know, what the Doctor's doing, and the Doctor has to make, you know, the Doctor's not just doing angelic stuff, he's considering the genocide of a species. He's got some very difficult moral choices to make, and Davros has some choices to make about how to ensure that his species survives, and he's made some pretty uncompromising decisions, and it's embodied in that brilliant scene. And that power would set me up above the gods. It's going to be exterminated Thal, who's going to die in a lot of pain now because the laser beams really hurt. So yeah, I think the extras were instructed to go, this is just really killing you a lot. And look at the smoke. It's just these, you know, the Thal Dome is a couple of corridors in a room. But they've done it well. But you can hear the fire crackling. But yeah, that power would set me up above the gods speech. That was the cliffhanger that I inserted into my backup safety copy. Isn't that the Thal we've just seen killed? I think it is. Although there are a lot of similarly blonde types. I bet David Biller is one of them, because he was a very blonde extra who passed away last year, I think, who you suddenly go, if you're on the lookout for him. He's one of the Time Lords technicians in episode 10 of the War Games, the blonde one. And once you've spotted him, he's in the background of the Green Death. You go, oh, yeah, it's that guy. But yes, my false cliffhanger that I inserted was that speech. And I used to play Davros on stage in a sketch show called the Unbroadcastable Radio Show. And whatever Davros was doing, he had a different job every week. He ended up building to a speech that ended in that power would set me up above the gods, and you know, my face would go red, and it would always get a round of applause. So this is the scene in the cassette where Carvel has lines. I remember going, oh, he's actually in it, but it took me a while to realise, because he only says 2 or 3 things, and you go, oh, that is why. So Tom Georgeson doesn't have a credit. So I thought, well, that'd be interesting, because I should tell him at some point if I ever encounter him at signing, go, because you've not got a credit, they might not have realised you're in it, which means you're not getting any of the royalties for it. And there's no better way to please an actor than to tell them that they're due some repeat payments or whatever. But then there was an article very recently in one of the Doctor Who magazine specials saying that actually Tom Georgeson's agent never replied when they sent him for clearances. So they released it anyway and just didn't put his name on the packaging. So I wonder still if to this day Tom Georgeson doesn't know that he's actually featured on the cassette, and because his agent was either negligent or lazy or didn't notice, if he's due probably quite a serious accumulation of cash. Now here's a scene I remember going, oh well, this isn't in the cassette, and I don't remember it from any of the repeats. And Terry Walsh and Alan Chun's there. They both are having a scrap. Are both in it. So basically, this is going to be a protracted fight scene. I mean, this is entirely unnecessary. Nice corridor sets though, and it's a decent fight. And I think it's there to show that Garman, abhors death. It sets him up as the opposite of Davros. We will not kill. A stupid waste of life. Okay. It's a very handy illustration, but we can also live without it. But it's a perfectly well staged scene. And they called Sten guns, those sorts of machine guns with the magazine on the side. They're always quite fun to play when you're a kid playing war. Yeah, I used to play war. So unfortunately now some people try and play war as as adults. That's when you have to worry. Again, look at this lighting. It's just look, and he's waiting in the darkness, and I love the little shake that he gives to his hand as well. He's a magnificent actor, Michael Wisher, and the fact that he is. This is what makes him a great villain, is that and again, unlike the Daleks, who seem to be reactive creatures, do you know what I mean? The Dalek sees a thing and it exterminates. I mean, I know not always, as I say, they're very cunning in the writing of David Whittaker. And it's because without Davros, they can be cunning themselves, but they become much more ciphers to him after this. But this is so sort of fresh to have, and I love the fact he doesn't even tell Nyder, and it's good because you never quite. I mean, Nyder is loyal to the end, but he tests him, doesn't he? And in a way, that's very, very, commendable in a way. Is that Davros, Nyder has many reasons to sort of go, I'm backing out this chum, and he doesn't, because he believes fervently in Davros's mission. And that's a fantastic mask that he has. Look at Tom Baker. I mean, I love this outfit that he has. He's got a cravat and a scarf, and I really like that jacket with the patches. And so he's just about to find a change. This is the really odd bit where they go halfway through. They go, "Yes, Sarah, I think you need a change of gear." Okay, then I'll change into these combat pants, which is pretty much. Is that what happens now? I'm pretty certain. But I do like that outfit for Sarah, the combat outfit for Sarah that she then wears in the next few episodes, and indeed the next adventure. Explosives. So this is building up to, because while all the politicking is going on, the Doctor has. I mean, he doesn't see Davros again, does he? Oh, I remember this. The Time Lord gave me 3 options. Only one of them still open. Genocide. That seems such a grown-up thing to say. And I remember when the Doctor was charged with genocide in at the end of Trial of a Time Lord episode 12. I remember saying to my brother, the Doctor's been charged with genocide, because genocide is, it's a terrible thing, but in terms of in a drama when you're a kid, it's such a it's a word that makes what they're doing, the stakes seem extremely high. And I'm having to say to my mum, what does genocide mean? She said it's the destruction of a whole species. And you go, God, it doesn't get much worse than that. And it's the fact that it's the Doctor that's saying it. And he's saying, the Time Lord gave me 3 options, and this is now the last resort. He's not doing this glibly, and yet he's sometimes this Doctor is very glib and breezy, but Tom Baker has the requisite dramatic heft to really sell the idea that the Doctor's doing something with grim determination that he's got no choice to do. Now, Carvel, of course, as well as having had lines that he doesn't get credit for, this is his last episode. Well, I don't know when we get our last glimpse of him, but he's not in episode 6, so I don't know if he goes to the loo, and then when he comes back, everyone's been killed. He goes, you better go away now. There he is. And of course, they do their best here, but the whole of the Dalek project better work, because the entire staff of the bunker are middle-aged guys. So I don't know what Garman's great plan is, unless, as I say, other members of the elite are sequestered elsewhere. Of course, this happens in so much of this television, where a group of 5 or 6 people is supposed to represent a whole movement / society / planet. And I think we just get used to that. It's the grammar of watching these sorts of shows at these sorts of times. Look at that tapping finger. I think that's a great thing, and it really ups the tension, because you sort of go, well, I don't really trust Davros, but also because I think Dennis Chinnery's done such a good job of being such a sort of gentle, hero type. You don't quite believe that those guys aren't going to win, because Doctor Who stories are one. That's the other thing that's extraordinary about this story, is that actually the Doctor's mission is really doomed to failure. And I know he sort of says, he's affected it by 50,000 years or whatever it is he says, but he says it's no more than that, but he doesn't, he has no material impact. He doesn't do what the Time Lords wanted him to do, because for the rest of the series, and forevermore, the Daleks are still doing what they do and killing as they kill and all of that. But he's going to say, I want to speak to the whole elite. Is it a full meeting of the elite, and it's all blokes. It's if anything dates it, it's that. Never mind the odd haircut or the odd pair of flared trousers. It's extraordinary, isn't it, that and that didn't seem particularly strange, when I was younger, but you look at it now and go, did nobody go, well, should we have a couple of women? Do you know what I mean? Should we? But what is normal to you seems normal until you take a step away from it, sometimes it takes, it just takes somebody else to come in and go, should we be doing this? And sometimes it just takes you to look back 10 years later and go, oh, that seems so normal, and now it doesn't. They have lost. He does that so well. Look at this. I mean, this is, really compromised in terms of production. In fact, the Dalek ground to a halt there. But that sky, instead of just having the white studio as the backdrop, I think the light glistening off the Daleks, and look at that. And they're almost silhouettes there. Absolutely terrific. And I suppose one of the things the Doctor set back in the development of the Daleks is that the Daleks, when he first meets them in the first Dalek story, can only move off static electricity. So maybe that's one of the things he set back. So he's created his own timeline. I don't really know how timelines work. I don't really care, because you can. I'm not that bothered about sort of rationalising things too much. All the things that happen in the series happen, and they work. Now, if there's something that out and out contradicts something, it is a bit annoying. But I don't see a need to sort of tie this up with how they fits into the Hartnell stories or the Troughton stories or whatever, because they stand on their own 2 feet as what they are. And if Carvel is the Emperor Dalek because he went out for a piss and fell into some pistons, I don't, you could make that case, but it's an awful waste of energy. But good luck if that's what you want to do. That's just Tom Baker in a bit of plastic and some chopped liver or whatever, and an aptitude for guttural noises and facial expressions that really sell all of that stuff. Good for him. Garman's going to go sink down to the... But yeah, so he actually highest on the credits when he has the least to do. There we go. Doesn't matter. So that is the end of episode 5 of Genesis of the Daleks. I'm going to have to choose my favourite thing, and I'm sorry I sort of got into one. I think it's worth clarifying, I am not one of those... Well, I try very hard. Things annoy me, and I get frustrated. I get frustrated with television, particularly modern television, when people don't seem to care. It's a medium that so many people want to be involved with, and so many creative people want to have a go at. When I encounter people who get the opportunity to do it, who don't work really hard at it, because when you're a freelancer and a creative person, you work really hard all of the time. It always amuses me when I email somebody at the BBC at 5:31 and you get an email back saying, I am out of the office till 9 o'clock, and you go, God, I answer emails at 1 o'clock in the morning. But I understand it's perfectly acceptable, because you only get paid for the hours that you do. But that's well done you, because there's a lot of people making programs and endeavors that aren't paid for the hours that they do at all, let alone but anyway, I think the reason that story of the people making the documentary about Doctor Who to celebrate its 50th anniversary being so dismissive of some key elements of the show, I just thought, when there's so many people, and I'm not including myself in that, there's so many people out there who can make television programs who would be really sympathetic to that material, seems really bizarre. And I do resent, as I say, nothing. I'm not bringing me into this equation at all, because I very much, I keep very productive. I throw stuff at the wall, and I hope that some of it sticks. And I certainly believe you have to make your own opportunities, and you have to make your own work. And there's nothing worse, actually, than on Facebook seeing friends of mine who are either creatives or Doctor Who fan creators or comedians who keep looking at what other people are doing and slagging off and going, and there's a sense of, oh, why isn't that me doing that? And I think, just do what you do. Don't worry about what other people do. And I think you have to do that, or otherwise that way madness lies, or you look a little bit bitter, and that's not a good look. And it's not a good thing to succumb to, because how we are is sorry to get zen like this, is a state of mind. And I've got as many frustrations as anybody, but to let the one's ambition or bitterness or missed opportunities consumes one goes against any creativity you might then want to exhibit. And the other thing is, people might be doing stuff that you don't like, but they've also had to work very hard, and they are doing the best with the opportunities that they get. So if there's a comedian that you don't like, they haven't nicked your spot. They're just doing what they do. And if you don't think they're any good, that's fine. That doesn't matter. But they're what the buyer wants. They're what the market wants. They're what the whoever's working and making those programs at the moment wants. And if it's not you, you have to give people a reason to make it you. But that is not the same as, I think, people sort of... there's an industry of television looking at itself disdainfully, and I think it's a really odd business to be in, to be looking to treat the medium that you work in, that so many people are desperate to work in and love and have an aptitude for, and be slightly dismissive of it, because you think, well, what are you doing? You're wasting your time and mine, which is why... the airwaves are filled with so much sort of stuff that you think, why? This is clearly people who can't be asked and don't care. And I find that really bizarre of a medium that could be fueled on love and creativity is often fueled by people doing something they don't particularly want to do or care about. And I don't quite know how we've got into that position. And that's an anathema to me. And I just got carried away talking about that because... And what did I do? I let it overshadow the absolute glee I should have been exhibiting, talking about the brilliant acting and the brilliant writing of the Davros Doctor Who scene of, if you had a file and it could destroy a life, would you use it? And Davros actually giving it genuine consideration and then getting carried away in the whole scenario and revealing himself, to be somebody who would exercise that power and getting drunk on that power, but then it being shown that actually that's a weakness because the Doctor then grabs onto him and manages. Now had the Doctor planted that seed because he knew that Davros would drop his guard? I don't think so. That's the Doctor reacting to that situation. And then, of course, when it looks like the Doctor's got the upper, excuse the pun, hand, and he does the thing with the life support system, and I think the way that Michael Wisher acts that sort of slow sort of atrophying of Davros's faculties is really, really good. And the Doctor saying, next time I press that button, it stays pressed. I mean, I could quote the whole thing. I might even. And then just as it looks like this order cannot be, then Nyder comes in and hits him on the head. And doesn't he say, what do you want done with this? So it's another great Nyder line. So that's what I should have been doing. I shouldn't have allowed myself to be consumed by fury and bitterness. Because that's the Davros side of the argument. That's what Davros does, doesn't he? He gets consumed by his hatred, and that's the two sides of that argument. And it's not to say you shouldn't feel angry at things you think are wrong, but it's how you then counter that. Do you butt against it with anger, or do you do the riposte by living the opposite? God, I worry that I'm absolutely full of. But look, I just do the best I can. My favourite thing about that episode is obviously the scene between Davros and the Doctor. That power would set me up above the God scene. One of the great scenes of Doctor Who. And if I were to make a documentary about Doctor Who, I would showcase that, and I would have people singing its praises from arsehole to breakfast time, because that would be easy to do and the people would be easy to find. Right, what does David Quantick have to say about episode 5 of Genesis of the Daleks?
Number 5. Well, the best speech in the history of Doctor Who. Do I have the right? Simply touch one wire against the other and that's it. The Daleks cease to exist. Hundreds of millions of people, thousands of generations can live without fear, in peace, and never even know the word Dalek. It was the moment when Doctor Who became a grown-up show. I can remember seeing it at the time. Suddenly it was, wow, a moral dimension. Normally, John Pertwee used to just hit people. People would run away. William Hartnell would happily destroy entire planets without a second thought. But Tom Baker was a moral philosopher. It's interesting that in this scene, Sarah Jane does the arguing. She's the one who says, no, kill them, because you think Harry would be the one to do that. He's in the Navy. He's quite used to not making moral decisions and killing lots of people, possibly. But no, it's one of the best Doctor Who moments. And the fact that it's 2 wires makes it even better. It's not an enormous sci-fi device. It's a man in a scarf with 2 wires.
Now, don't get me wrong. Unless I was talking about Tom Georgeson nipping out for a wee and missed that, I'm pretty certain that 2 wires speech is next week. And so I think, I call upon the arbitration gods, I think it's an absolutely, David is absolutely entitled to pick it, but I think I'd got my eye on picking that myself for next week, and as he's picked it for the wrong episode, I think I'm still entitled to pick it next week. Now, that doesn't harm him, because it means that the thing I've chosen for this week isn't the same as the thing he's chosen for this week, but I think that's slightly unfair, because he's chosen the thing for this week that isn't for this week. I can still choose the 2 wires for next week and claim the point for this week, but he'll choose something else for next week, which I, of course, won't choose the same thing, because I'll have chosen the wires for this week. So I think I'm scuppered on a technicality there, but that's okay. It's because actually the competition is woefully unimportant, and if anybody is listening to keep score, that's not really the point. But I know that some people will be going, well, I think you have to get him to re-record that. I don't know why I always give a Doctor Who fan a nasal voice like this. I should perhaps make some documentary about Doctor Who, because I'm so apt to caricature people unfairly. Anyway, look, that is a great scene, but I'll talk about that next week. I stand by my choice of one of the greatest scenes in Doctor Who's history. It's a fantastic episode of Doctor Who, that. This is one of Doctor Who's greatest moments. But remember, well, you don't need me to tell you anything, but my feeling is, based on the things that I've thought about watching this episode, and based on some of the things going on at the moment, what other people think about the thing you love doesn't really matter. There's a thing now where I think some Doctor Who fans want to have a go at other Doctor Who fans about how and what they like about Doctor Who. I couldn't give a tinker's cuss what anybody else thinks about what I like about Doctor Who. And if you think my choice of what I like about a story, or my choice of my interpretation of another story is a reason to think badly of me, good luck. I couldn't give a flying monkeys what you think. And so nor should you. So if it's really interesting that I think we can read all sorts of brilliance into Doctor Who, and I think it's interesting to have intellectual discussions about whether we think an episode of Doctor Who is pushing this agenda or pushing that agenda and all of that sort of thing. But if we come to different conclusions from each other, that doesn't mean anyone's a better or a worse fan. And actually, if you even have a hankering to be a better fan than somebody else, I think you're quite a ludicrous person, because we create Doctor Who in our own image, and that does nobody any harm. Like the actor Paul Eddington said when they said what did he want his obituary to be, and he said he did very little harm, and I think that's often more valuable than a righteous crusade. I don't know why I've got to. I think it's because I perhaps had a little righteous crusade of my own, and I felt bad about it because it's actually a spectacular waste of energy. Even though it felt so important at the time, and all of that came bubbling up when I started talking about it again. But it stopped me from being in a happy time and place. It made me in a grumpy time and place. And this is not what this podcast is called. So therefore, hopefully, having gone for a little segue into Grumpyville, we are now, as we reach the end of this episode, once again in a happy time and place. And they're good places and times to be. Well, welcome. Veep, Brass Eye, The Day-to-Day, Danger Mouse, The Thick of It, just some of the programmes that David Quantick has contributed to as a writer. And now here he is, contributing to my silly podcast, where I get all lovey-dovey about Doctor Who. And I make no apologies for accentuating the positive. I'm not blind to Doctor Who's faults. I don't think everything about Doctor Who is marvellous, but I've decided to spend my energies just trying to be positive out there. Of course I'll sit with my mates and slag off, insert name of story here. But that's not what this is. I think it's very easy to go, oh, that's rubbish. So easy. But notice that I remove the credibility of the person saying it by giving them an awful voice. But It's selfish reasons as well as because I think it's easy to get consumed. I'm sort of going on the back of episode 5 where I went off on a little bit of a tirade about I pulled into Negativeville and pulled up a chair next to Grumpy Socks and failed to hang on to even a basic metaphor. Oh God. Anyway, I'm going to accentuate the positive, and David Quantick is somebody who has made me laugh many, many, many times, always put a smile on my face. So that's what I try and do with this, whilst trying to put positive energy out there. Why not? Why not? And we're going to do so with episode 6 of Genesis of the Daleks. I've got to guess what David's favourite thing about it is, but as he's shown, his favourite thing about episode 1, was something that I couldn't possibly have done, because I don't know his friend who he watched it with, and his favourite thing about episode 5 is actually from episode 6. So he's an unconventional kind of guy, but I'm okay with that. We're free as a bird on this podcast. We're not going to be constrained by continuity. We're going to do a Robert Holmes. If it seems good at the time, we're going to do it. And it's episode 6, and I want you to press play in 3, 2, 1. Just for context, if you hear whiz bangs and pops, it's not the Thals outside trying to get in with their bombs. It's fireworks outside, and which my dog Bernard is deciding to counter with growls. I'm not sure it's going to put the fireworks off their exploding. It's not going to make them dull their incandescence, but he's going to have a bash anyway because he's a guard cockapoo. It's part 6 of Genesis of the Daleks, which I've always sort of seen as a bit of an anticlimax. I don't know. It just seems to be sparser, although there are actually more Khaled elite, because Garman's gone off to get his mates who will number more than the 3 guys that he had behind him, and Tom Georgeson, although Tom Georgeson has disappeared. He will not be in this episode. So, oh God, I wanted to do this as a stage play because I had this script in my head, and I gave Carvel a bigger role because I liked him. It's really odd. This is the touch. This is going to be hard pressed to be beaten. But as I say, it means that I'm going to harm my own chances because I already know that David won't choose this because he's chosen it for last week. But it is superb. Tom Baker's intensity is fabulous. And the gravity that he gives it just because of that wonderful sonorous voice of his, the sweat on his face. And as David mentioned in the last wrong episode, it's Sarah Jane who gives the counter argument. We're talking about the Daleks. Oh, she's so good. And she's giving a perfectly rational, and that shot is brilliant. Of the 2 wires, and then the pulling of the focus. It's a justly lauded moment. It's a brilliant piece of writing, and a brilliant piece of direction. It doesn't throw this moment away. Everything, and this is the beginning of the final episode, and everything pauses for a philosophical discussion. But it's a philosophical discussion upon which the entire drama of this story is based. Are you any better? And I think we have to look at that in terms of the some of the arguments that are being had today. I see many people on my own side, as it were, resorting to great unpleasantness to try and win the argument. And I never think that you, because you're the goodie, can do the things that you don't like that the baddie does, because the baddie doesn't think they're bad. That the person on the other side of the argument is trying to do the thing that they think is best. So if you then go, but I can do this to them because I'm me and they're them, well, you're as bad as them. And that's the really interesting argument that that the Doctor has with himself there is, am I any better than the Daleks? Now, Tom Georgeson has gone, and there's this guy Kravos, who's he's a member of the military rather than the scientists, but who's got this little subplot where Davros goes, I gave you a special heart, he gets a couple of lines. And I wonder if that was originally supposed to be Carvel, and they just went, because it seems odd that, you save having an actor for an episode, but you've got a different actor instead. So I wonder if at some point Carvel was supposed to be Kravos, although then why would that character have been one of the first to turn against Davros if he did give him his special heart? I haven't mentioned the time ring enough. I think I've started to bring it up in one episode. I like the fact that the Doctor's getting all his gear back now. It's just been left in a perspex tuck box. The time ring is a hoary old device that has been so useful for this story. I love in the first Dalek story that the reason they have to go back to the city is not because they're heroes who want to help the Thals save the day. It's because actually they can't leave the planet until they get their thing back, and that opens up all sort of murky. So do you turn these peaceful people into warlike people in order that you can get your door key back, your fluid link back? How do we feel about that? And that's not lazy writing. It's it's there deliberately, and it's that this is the moral dilemmas here are deliberately in this to show that in the world of Doctor Who, the goodies have to make quite harsh decisions, and if they make those harsh decisions, how close are they flirting with being who these guys are? Maybe that's the screen grab. I was in an article in somewhere that I read quite a lot. Anyway, it's a great shot of Peter Miles and Michael Wisher. He's got a very gentle voice and a very gentle manner, Dennis Chinnery, and he was an expert on the actor Robert Atkins, Robert Harlan. And I believe by the end of his life had quite a sort of curvature of the spine thing going on, and was quite in quite a lot of sort of pain and discomfort, but still I think went to signings and things like that. But I think he got a scoliotic thing going on, because of course we all age. I never had the pleasure with Dennis Chinnery, but he seems to have had a decent career and worked with Hartnell and Baker and Colin Baker, from The Chase to Genesis to The Twin Dilemma. That's quite a journey. This is a nice piece of music from Dudley Simpson. I like what he chooses to score the Daleks with. I'm no expert on music. It's funny because there aren't many sort of Dudley Simpson tunes that sort of stand out for their own sake, and I wonder if therefore they're sort of doing a slightly better job. Is that I probably wouldn't choose to listen to Dudley Simpson incidental music for fun, whereas there is other incidental music I will confess I have listened to, and yet actually the music here is quite familiar to my ears because of course it's the accompaniment to the cassette. But it's nicely bombastic, but it's still the visuals that you're mostly noticing. It's that thing about incidental music it's like lighting. It's at its best if you don't actually notice it, but it's complementing the stuff that you're seeing. And so here we are. Here we have Betan and Severin. I've read a thing where apparently Stephen Yardley went looking for a bit of work in a break, and the BBC, and they mistook him for a tramp who'd wandered in because he was dressed as Severin, but he was just you could do it in those days, knocking on doors, going, "Any jobs going?" Which is apparently, Troughton was never out of work, Patrick Troughton, and you sort of think, oh, that's because he was a respected character actor who everybody wanted to employ. No, his sons tell me he had to hustle. He wrote letters, he knocked on doors, and again, sort of alluding to what I was talking about last time. I love that little moment between Betan and Severin where he goes, "I've got to go and be brave," and she goes, "Yeah, but I am going to blow the place up whether you're back or not, because I've only met the Doctor once. I don't know he's the hero of this show," kind of thing. But yeah, Troughton hustled, and sometimes a lot of people get a lot of work because they are very good at the networking side of things. And because I'm not, I've for many years thought of that as a sort of dirty word, but it's a skill. I can think of a couple of comedians who are good comics. They and having got the work, they proved themselves and are now mainstays on television. But it's because when they started out, they turned up at all the right gigs and they spoke to the right people, and that is part of the job. And if you're not very good at it, like I'm not, you cannot blame other people who do that. It's just a quite nice moral dilemma, this, for Kravos, who obviously makes the decision to side with Davros. But that just goes to show that, behind Davros's bad science, there's also that good science that has benefited people, Davros is lost. I'm getting away. The time ring falls out again. Sorry, that's another time I've started talking about the time ring and not. So this last time getting away. Don't believe it for a minute, but I love Nyder. He's so good. The time ring is unique to this story and just is really, really, really handy. It's a devilishly clever storytelling device. Because it never gets boring. Sometimes I find Jeopardy, especially in a lot of modern television, is based on two people not having the right conversation. And because of that, there's 3 episodes of misunderstanding or not getting to do the right thing. And you go, oh, come on, if only you'd done that, this wouldn't have happened. The time ring serves the same sort of purpose of either holding up the plot or keeping people somewhere, or meaning that people have to go back to somewhere. But it's a perfectly plausible thing. They never get careless about the time ring particularly. They're aware of how important it is. They keep telling us it's the lifeline, in case we've forgotten that bit at the beginning of episode 1. And every now and again it's either confiscated or falls out and means that our heroes have to do another thing, which then helps us with the storytelling and the plot as it needs to happen, as the writer needs it to happen. And I just think that's a thing of great economy, that without it being annoying, because sometimes things, if not so artfully handled, can be quite annoying. But I think that's nice, and I like this. This is a very doctorish piece of reasoning. I remember thinking this was terribly clever when I was younger, this idea of going, Nyder's not cooperating. Of course he's not. And Sarah, again, articulates that he's telling the truth. But the Doctor goes, no, because Davros, it's high up, and Davros needs you to do it. And again, that's just a nice little piece of reasoning that means we get a little bit of a delay to what they need, because Nyder buys some time by lying, but the Doctor works it out, and it's quite fun to have him work it out. And there we go. And so then we've got the tapes that actually end up having no impact on the story at all, except for the fact that they gave us that juicy, glorious cliffhanger. They gave us that bit of the Doctor having to, give stuff away in order that his friends don't get hurt. They did that acting of reacting to the laser very well as well. And it then facilitated the conversation between Davros and the Doctor. So it's all a beautiful jigsaw. And some of the pieces may not seem to be important. They might all just be bits of sky. But actually, if you don't put all those bits of sky in, you don't get such a pretty picture. And the time ring's fallen off, so you've got to stay for the end of the episode. And the end of the adventure. Because at the moment, you think that, politics will win the day. Very naive, Doctor Who. Now, this Thal soldier is John Gleeson, who turns up a bit later. He's a very handsome man. He turns up a bit later in the Seeds of Doom as Charles Winlet, the first of the guys to get infected by the crinoid. And it's a nice little part he's got in that. He's a very naturalistic actor. And he is, I believe, the son of the actor Leon Quartermain. But interestingly, and I think was born John Quartermain. Now, it does say that on IMDb, but I would always say double check. And I have read an article that says that he's the nephew of Leon and Charles Quartermain, but I don't know if Leon Quartermain had another sibling apart from Charles, so he couldn't be the nephew of both. So the jury is out, but he's certainly of the Quartermain clan, and he is certainly, and his son is called Jack Quartermain, so he's certainly a John Quartermain, but decided to call himself John Gleeson as an actor, which is interesting because Leon Quartermain was a very famous actor. So why would you not capitalise upon that? Maybe he wanted to go his own way. There's an article in the paper today about Zoe Ball's son not having access to any of her money because he's being independent and going his own way. So anyway, that's John Gleeson, who plays Thal Soldier. And I've sort of missed the bit that "you are insane, Davros." That's a line that I distinctly remember from the cassette. And this is pretty grim. And I sometimes think it's a bit of a compromise when I love the fact that yes, poor old Garman gets his own death, and that shot of Garman of Snyder is vile. That it's not just, and then he throws Kravos sort of into the exterminating melee. So for all his iron heart that Davros has made for him, all he has to do is sort of protest and get over. Snyder chucks him into the path of the laser beams. But I always thought it was a bit of a compromise that, you know, one beam could kill lots of people. You sort of want to see each person getting sort of zapped individually, but it actually shows the power of the Daleks in a way, is that they're all bathed, you know, just one shot can wipe out a whole phalanx of middle-aged scientists. But it was nice that Garman at least got his own death. But that's quite shocking. That it seemed to be. I mean, you knew because Davros was tapping his fin, but the Doctor didn't. As far as the Doctor was concerned, politics had won the day. Garman, you know, was gonna make sure that the Doctor completed his mission for the Time Lords. I mean, the Doctor hasn't spoken to Davros since getting knocked out by Snyder, and it just goes to show, Doctor, if you want a job doing properly, you have to do it yourself. And that extermination is really pretty harsh, isn't it? Look, that's a pile of dead people. It's still not, in the great scheme of things, a lot of people. And again, we have to sort of extrapolate, because there's no way that surely can be the whole of the scientific and military elite, because I think that would be a naive understanding of the optimum numbers required. But of course, the Daleks are increasing, which again, and I think if you were making this with an inexhaustible budget, you would be sort of showing the Daleks continuing production or something going on there in the background at this stage. I know we have Davros notice it later on. Doctor's got his big long coat back, very handy for if he breaks his collarbone on location. So now I think what's supposed to happen here, isn't it, is that the Dalek goes over the wires, and that causes the explosion. That sort of comes to nothing, as I say. The Doctor just sort of does I've affected their development a bit, but he hasn't destroyed. The blowing up of the incubator room doesn't destroy the Daleks. So despite that big speech, and despite what we see here, which, as I say, the impression is supposed to be given that the Dalek going over the wires completes the circuit. He doesn't complete his mission, and yet there is an explosion here. Yes, he's going to go over it. Yes, that's not just the blowing up of the Dalek. But I like this as well. Is that now that's, I'm not sure I buy this, but it's very handy. Of course, there happens to be, just because otherwise how would the Doctor know or how would our heroes know what has gone on in the main? But it's a good job that we've got another picture. What's happening there? Harry from Between the Lines is having a very long toilet break. Oh, well, tell him not to come out. Go and rescue him. It's all right. He's going to become the Emperor Dalek. But this is great because at this point, as a Doctor Who fan, you go, well, we know Davros isn't in any of the future stories. This is the earliest Dalek story, so he's going to have to die. And as I think I said at the beginning, there's an argument that he might have been, for everybody's sake, better off staying dead. But then again, it was so exciting. Destiny is one of my first memories. Seeing him come alive there. This is, and I again, this is the Daleks. Laser beams are agonizing. I don't think it's the best death for somebody who's so sort of clipped and straightforward as Nyder. I would have preferred a slightly better staged death. And Peter Miles's death in Doctor Who Silurians is one of the best deaths in the history of the show. But we'll talk to that when I get to that one. Michael McManus records his favourite things about Silurians. The Doctor actually loses his hat there. But it's back on again now. It would have been awful, wouldn't it, if the Doctor had got through that door and the laser beam had gone through and just killed some poor Thal soldier in the background. So there we have it. It's done with great economy. This final episode, the whole thing is because this is quite an epic story, and it's actually got quite a big cast. It's got a bigger cast than you think, because there are sort of characters that come in and do that little bit and go out again. I think the cast could be more sort of efficiently streamlined, but it does give it a more actually having. Carvel and Kravos actually gives it a broader scope, if you like. And we're not used to it because we're used to sometimes characters being consolidated to tell the story more efficiently, if you like. And that thing of having, one character into many parts divide one man, or, it's the Henry V thing, isn't it? One person actually represents a whole lot, and you're supposed to extrapolate mentally beyond what can be staged in a small studio with a small cast or whatever. Now, you see, I always thought when he said in the total timescale no more than that, he would sort of click his fingers and going, that time period is the equivalent of that. But he's not. He's being much more literal. So it kind of, at the end, the story sort of goes, well, I've done a thing, but actually it doesn't really matter. So it kind of has its cake and eats it, really. But it's done with such confidence that you accept it. And have pity. Brilliant. I remember as a kid, again, being caught with that going, he's created these pitiless creatures. He appeals to their pity and they don't know what it means. That's brilliant. That's, careful of the monsters you unleash. And this is just so quotable. And then here he goes and he takes his time. And in the book, it sort of says it's almost like he can't bring himself to do it. But I'm not sure that's clear there. And in the cassette, this cuts off. They go, stronger. We will take and the time is right. We will take our rightful place as the supreme beings, our power of the universe. Now, I used to think because on the cassette it goes universe. And then goes into the music, and I thought, well, they've had to do that because the screen cuts off and the Dalek doesn't actually say the whole word. It does say the whole word in the actual program, so they just edited it slightly too quickly. And they also say, well, so you didn't fail the mission. Then he goes, well, actually, because out of great evil will come something good. But that's you've changed the goalposts there because that wasn't your mission. Wasn't to decide at the end, well. Out of great evil must come something good. Your mission was to stop the Daleks, which we thought you did when you blew up the incubator. So anyway, but it's fine because that's an interesting philosophical point about Garman's back up to third billing. But yes, out of great evil must come something good. But is that any comfort to the millions of people who die as a result of the great evil? It's that's the universe that Doctor Who inhabits, which throws up its very own interesting philosophical points. Davros's mask, John Friedlander, great unsung hero of Doctor Who. It's a beautiful mask. So I'm sorry that I kept wanging on about the cassette tape of Genesis of the Daleks. I think it's a great story. Episode 6 worked there for me. As I say, I've always seen it as a bit of a sort of anti-climax. I think it may just be because Carvel disappears, and I've never quite got over that. So if anyone wants to write a short trip, well, it's not a short trip. It's quite a long trip, or there's no loo roll, and he's waiting for somebody to come past. But anyway. I've got to choose my 2 favourite things, because I choose a favourite thing from episode 6, and then I choose a favourite thing overall. My favourite thing from episode 6 is going to be the touching the wires. I can't not. I could. Or should I try and win this? Well, no, because I won't win it, because I get the point. I get the point for touching the wires for last episode. I've decided that's the rules. And it just seems, I've got to be true to myself. The touching the wires scene is a monumentally great scene of Doctor Who. And my thing overall, Duncan Brown's lighting, it's the lighting in Doctor Who often comes in for stick. It's really hard to light videotape drama, to light, low budget videotape drama with, plywood robots painted in gunmetal gloss paint, moving over a studio white cyclorama, and to actually make it look atmospheric and shadowy and spooky. It's an impressive piece of work in terms of the lighting. So I salute you, Duncan Brown, lighting guy. Sadly, no longer with us. But he is interviewed on the DVD extra, so that was well done by, I think it was actually Ian Levine who made that documentary. Well done, Ian, for getting Duncan Brown in. I think that was an excellent call. The DVDs, we are so lucky that they give us access to these people who are now all gone. Okay. What's David chosen as things 6 and bonus?
Episode 6, and in summary, I've got to say, the plotting of Genesis of the Daleks. It's not just bish bosh cliffhanger, though there are cliffhangers and there are bish boshes. The plotting is beautiful. First of all, they set up this long and familiar war. Then they introduce the fact that the Daleks don't exist yet. What the heck? Not only that, but this is a kind of Nazi society where suddenly the scientists have come to the fore. The scientists are now running things. We're moving away from morality. And then the scientists are themselves outmaneuvered by Davros. It just keeps going, keeps upping the ante. And then the final twist, Davros is killed by his own creations. While Doctor Who is worrying about morality, another morality tale is unfolding in front of him. It's absolutely fantastic. I've been asked to mention a bonus thing that I love about this, and the bonus thing is the creation myth of the Daleks. Because, as with all TV series, and bad news fans, TV isn't real, so they can change things retroactively. There have been more than one creation myths of the Daleks. And this one, which is now, I think, pretty much canon, unless it turns out that Jodie Whittaker was a Dalek again or something like that, is my favourite. And it reminds me very strongly of my favourite Dalek creation myth, which is the one in We Are the Daleks. We Are the Daleks, of course, was a short story in the 1973 Doctor Who special, which you bet when I was 12 I bought. And it's Terry Nation again saying, oh, the Daleks, yeah, I've just realised they're not from here, they're not from Skaro, they're actually from the planet Amaron, and they're actually humans transplanted there as part of an experiment. So we are the Daleks. That really did my nut in. So Genesis of the Daleks, one of the all-time great Doctor Who's. I'm glad I got to nab it.
Well, we'll get to David's plug for his book that he's got coming out. By the time this episode goes out, it will be out, and hopefully you'll have listened to the plugs for it on all the previous instalments of Happy Times and Places Does Genesis of the Daleks. David's absolutely right about the plotting. The plotting is superb. From the time ring to the shifting morality play, and yes, the fact that Davros is ultimately the cunning Davros, the hugely intelligent Davros, the Davros who is amoral and in control all of the time, neglects to notice that he has been the architect of his own destruction, which is, dramatic irony and also a sort of moral payoff, if you like. It's a cruel morality. It's the morality of the real world in many ways. But all the morality in this is sort of compromised. The Doctors too, the Time Lords. Hang on, who's decided that they're in charge? I always think about that when. There are certain countries who are allowed nuclear weapons and certain aren't, and we're essentially saying because you can't handle the nukes. You go, well, who are you to say who can't handle it? But then again, we haven't used them. But then again, we've elected ourselves chief nuclear weapons monitor, and are we all that? Who knows? I don't know. It's complicated. The thing about complex morality is, of course, that there are no easy answers, and satisfying drama, gives voice to them, but doesn't necessarily seek to give answers, because I think the harsh reality is that there are a lot of contradictions within our morality, and we have to navigate those as best we can, and sometimes acknowledge that there are difficult questions to which we might not have answers, or which actually show our morality to be perhaps not all that we think it is, which keeps us on our toes. I think that's all you can do is stay on your toes and be aware. I think what the Daleks don't do that good humans do is that the Daleks are certain. They're the ones you've got to be careful of. The ones who are certain, because they're the ones who don't bend. And the ones who don't bend are the ones who will do anything. I think that's the lesson, and it's a lesson we need today as much as any other. But look, Genesis of the Daleks is very good, and out of something good must come something evil. That's Doctor Who Twitter occasionally. But I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm so over the moon that David Quantick has contributed. I'm sure you know his work. You don't need to seek it out. But if it's a chance for him to plug his book, then I'm delighted. I'm really thrilled that he's been on this podcast. I'm delighted that you're listening. Please come again when I will be perhaps having a more difficult job extolling the virtues of a Doctor Who story, because I found this one pretty easy, apart from a brief sojourn into Clamsville. I found this fairly straightforward, so I'm going to nip off to see if I can go and get Carvel to finish off what he's doing and use the facilities myself. But in the meantime, thanks very much for listening. Thanks for watching, whichever you've chosen to do. Thanks to David Quantick, who I'm going to allow to have the final word to plug his wares. But for now, cheerio.
And yeah, it says here, shamelessly plug anything you have coming up or your online presence. Well, I'm on Twitter, and on Twitter I'll be talking about my forthcoming quiz book, Quantick's Quite Difficult Quiz Book, which contains, I hope, many, many Doctor Who related rounds, including Doctor Who villain or musical instrument. I'm sure you can guess the crossover there. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, presented by me, Toby Hadoke, with my special guest, David Quantick. He could be found on Twitter @Quantick, and of course, that forthcoming book, Quantick's Quite Difficult Quiz Book, is now no longer forthcoming because it was published in October, which was in the future when I did this, but in the past when I did this version of this. So anyway, you can get it right now, and follow David too. He's a very funny man. These podcasts could not happen without the generosity of patrons. Those patrons include Andrew Jordan, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, Nathan Martin, David Matthewman, John McClay, Rossa McPhillips, Stuart Mitchell, Nathan Moore, Matthew Newton, Dave Owen, Melvin Pena, Keith Pirry, Jonathan Potter, Kevin Parker, Richie, Dylan Rees and John Rivers. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Those names you heard there get read out because they are part of my Patreon page, which you can sign up to for as little as £3 a month. Getting your name read out is one of the bonuses that you get, as is extra material, early material, bit of interaction, all sorts of things. It's fun there. But you certainly get stuff a lot earlier, and you get some stuff that nobody else gets. That's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Most things are available at the smallest tier of £3 a month, and you can even get 10% off that if you sign up for a year in one go. But I know times are tight and a monthly commitment is quite daunting. You can also go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and chuck something my way just whenever you can or feel inclined, or you're feeling sorry for me. But look, I know times are tight. I am very, very grateful that anybody listens to this stuff. That is hugely supportive and much appreciated. And the more people that listen, the better. So look, what costs you nothing is to go to iTunes or Podbean or any of those places where you can review things such as this and give them 5 stars. 5 stars really helps to separate us from the crowd, and perhaps a few lines saying something nice, or what you like about it, or that I should be king, or that I'm worth £1 million. And that would just really help to catch people's attention, and the more people's attention these catch, the more people will listen, and it will mean that me spending my midnight hours in in a cupboard doing this instead of contributing to family life and the domestic coffers means that perhaps, it's in some way been worth it. So yeah, do that. That'd be great. Thanks. Thank you. That's what I wanted to know. You are insane, Davros! And other things that... Oh, she is a norm. All norms are our enemies. And, I mean, I could do it all back in the day. I still kind of like it. Shall I kill him? Yes, Nida. I think you should.